I was under so much stress and fatigue that my insulin literally stopped working. I remember one day I was on a photo shoot and I was so upset and I felt so terrible. And the photographer kept saying, mate, you got to soften your face, try to be a bit more smiley. Like you look real, are you okay? And I wasn't okay. My blood glucose was 14 when it was meant to be 5. And I'd given dose after dose trying to correct it, and it was flatlined at 14.
Welcome to the Proof Podcast, a space for science-based conversation exploring the health and longevity benefits that come with mastering nutrition, physical exercise, mindfulness, recovery, sleep, and alignment. Facts, nuance, and trustworthy recommendations, minus the hyperbole. Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Great to be here with you. I'm your host, Simon Hill. I'm a qualified physiotherapist and nutritionist with an undergraduate science degree and a master's in the science of human nutrition. In my career, I've worked with many people, including elite professional athletes, to improve their health, performance, and longevity. And I'm currently involved in research with a group of nutrition scientists in Australia looking at dietary patterns and mental health. Today I sit down with my good friend and exercise physiologist, Drew Harrisberg. Yes, he's back. This time we debrief on the seed oil debate between Tucker Goodrich and Dr. Matthew Nagra, which, as of this recording, was updated to YouTube a few days ago. Given it was a 4-hour conversation that is admittedly quite hard to follow, we thought it would be instructive to share our thoughts, the main things that we noticed and where we landed by the end of it. We also talk about my blood tests and specifically 2 tests you may want to request to better understand your cardiovascular disease risk. How sleep deprivation could be making you eat more calories, tips to improve your sleep, how low intensity exercise and HIIT training differentially affects blood glucose levels, and what this means for people with diabetes, book and show recommendations, and of course, our thoughts on a few silly posts we saw on social media. Almost 3 hours of fun. Well, fun for us at least. Please do enjoy, and I'll catch you on the other side.
Yeah, well, you chose to disobey the Proof Podcast rules and regulations.
I know, it's poor etiquette. I've come here, I've ruffled the feathers already.
Headphone free.
Well, last episode, I did the whole thing with glasses on for you.
So did I.
Yeah, no, but I don't even need them. I'm short-sighted. So they weren't doing anything for me. They helped me see into the distance. We were doing a podcast face-to-face. It didn't help me read the computer or anything. That was purely
For me.
For you.
Well, I'll tell you what, I didn't wear them today
Yeah.
because I had a headache halfway through that with those new things and everything just looked very weird. So I feel much more comfortable.
You do look comfortable.
Back in the
And
contacts.
You weren't wearing a hat last time, I think. So you were really out of your depth. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a different look.
It was a different look. We're back. Back to normal.
Did you work out today?
I did. I did a my usual Sunday morning rope sesh. I actually want to talk about that later in the pod. I want to explain to people the blood glucose response to an exercise like that and potential ways to mitigate, which will tie into my study of the week, but we'll save that for a bit later.
Maybe for now, just what is the Sunday Bondi rope session all about?
So we have a little group. This rope climbing group has been around for a long time. I think when I was 14, I did my first session, and back then, you know Dimitri?
Yeah.
Dimmer? So for those who
He got
aren't
arrested.
aware, he did during COVID, yes. And he went to court and won the case, which is another story.
He walks around Bondi wearing red budgies.
Red Speedos year round. Never wears, like you think I don't wear a shirt? Dimmer wears
Super tanned.
no shirt, no shorts for the whole year. He voted in his budgies one year. So he walked into vote and someone from the Sydney Morning Herald snapped it and it made all the newspapers and everything. I mean, he's the most iconic man in Bondi. Everyone knows him. He knows everyone. People think he's a bit kind of scary because he looks like a big shaved gorilla. Like
Dimmy, that's his name.
Dimmer.
Dimmer.
Dimitri.
Gotcha.
Ex-Russian special forces paratrooper. But basically about, I don't know, maybe now 20 years ago, he started doing these sessions where he'd hang a rope off the cliffs on North Bondi near Bambuckler, and he'd get a group of guys and you just take turns. So you climb up to the top of the rope. It's about 8 to 10 meter rope. You can't use your legs. There were strict rules back then. You can't use your legs. It's just all upper body strength. You get to the top, you come back down and you go as many times as you can, and then the next guy goes and you continue for an hour or so.
How high?
I think it's about 10 meters.
Yeah. Someone got injured there.
Well, Dimitri fell off from the very top because the way he'd rigged the rope, something went wrong, and he fell from the top onto rock, like the North Bondi rocks, right? So it was a 10-meter free fall, and he shattered 20, 30 bones in his legs and feet and his back, and he obviously survived the fall, but he was in hospital for a while and in a wheelchair for a while, and then he got out of hospital. He came down to Bondi in his wheelchair, and we'd like lift him up onto the chin-up bar, and he'd pump out his reps. And
amazing.
So for 20 odd years, he's been doing the rope.
But the rope location, has it
now
moved
changed.
because of that?
Yes. So people would walk by and want to try it,
Mm-hmm.
and he just felt like he had a sort of duty of care to not. I mean, imagine if it happened to anyone else.
Sure.
You know, and he was so great in a strange way. He was grateful it happened to him.
So what makes it more secure now where it is?
It's a very different system. So before it was top anchored to the top of the cliff. There were a couple of bolts in the rocks. Now we hang it over a tree, so a branch, and then sounds worse, doesn't it? So now it's over a branch. It's a strong branch, and it's like it's the way it's distributed. It's hard to explain. It's not like it's hanging off this like thin little branch. It's like there's a V in the tree, so it's sitting right in a nice strong V, and then we anchor it off a long rope to the bottom of another tree next door.
Sounds good.
Sounds so dodgy when you put it into words.
Sounds like bro science.
It does. But anyway, so since he's fallen, no one's fallen. It's never had an issue. So we do that every Sunday, and we just do as many sets as possible. So today we did 20 sets. It was a small group, only 4 of us, but it's on Sundays, Monday, Wednesday, like all week. There's different groups. So.
And it's a cracking day in Bondi today.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So good to see the sun back out.
Yeah, and it's quite quiet because people are away for holidays. So definitely, I went for a swim earlier, but after this we'll go for another one. Yeah,
Did you go?
Yeah, I went North Bondi.
Yeah.
Warm, beautiful.
It's nice.
Yeah, it's a good day.
Yeah.
Did you train this morning?
I did.
You did.
Actually, I did legs.
Yep.
And I didn't know if I had any good news for today. And you said, well, I've got some good news for you.
Yeah.
But if I was going to have some good news, I think I told you my squat.
Yeah.
It just wasn't right for a while.
Yeah.
And I felt restricted in one of my hips in particular. And I couldn't quite work out what was happening, but I've been doing a lot more mobility, trying to open the hips up. And this morning I didn't have a whole lot of time. So I had one of those sessions where very little variety of exercises. I just chose 2 exercises. One was squats, and then I did some deadlifts. And the squats, I did 6 sets, and I'm starting to feel a lot freer. So my squat was feeling very smooth. I'm getting back up to the weights where I was before I started getting a bit tighter. And I was going to ask you this. For me personally, say I want to focus on a certain weight to do some sets for hypertrophy. Usually I sit in that sort of 8 to 14 reps. I find that I get more of those sets out, quality sets, if first I do 1 or 2 very heavy sets at say 3-4 reps.
Yeah.
And I feel this really heavy weight.
Yeah.
Then I back it off a little bit. And when I'm doing that set of 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, it feels much lighter.
Yeah. That's seen in the literature. That's a technique that powerlifters use. It's like a supramaximal warm-up set, which sounds weird. So what they do is they potentiate their way to their – so let's say you decide to do sets of 6 with 100 kilos for the day. That's what you're going to be doing.
That's close.
Was it?
Well, I did.
Well, I used to do way more with 100.
Yeah. I got up to 240 something pounds, which is about 110, 115 kilos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I was
that's
doing
good.
that.
I mean, you said the other day when you texted me that 80 was feeling heavy.
Yeah, but I had one of those days where I was just fatigued. I trained at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but my training has to be early in the day.
Yeah, me too.
If I train in the afternoon after doing a lot of work and just mental strain, I'm nowhere near as strong or powerful. I think I'm kind of half checked out.
Yeah, I think like on days like that, that's when you use the auto-regulation principle. So instead of like sticking, to a program that you've been prescribed a rep range or whatever, understand how you feel on that day and maybe decrease the load, increase the reps, go a little closer to failure at higher reps. You've just got to understand that not every day you're going to walk in and be able to hit a 1 rep max. That's just not how we are. But going back to what you were saying, so what you do is you potentiate your warm-up. So you have, say, 4 warm-up sets, or sometimes people do 5. So you could say take 50% of your working load, do 5 reps. 60% of your working load, do 4 reps. 70%, 3, so on and so forth, until you get to close to your working load. But then you do 1 more set, super maximal. So let's say you were doing 115 for sets of 6. You could do 120 for a double. You prime your nervous system. So it's almost like the firing of that brain to muscle pathway is ready to go. You felt how heavy the load is on your muscles and joints. Then when you back off and go back to the 115,
feels like a lightweight.
It just feels light. Yeah. It's a good technique. People do that in powerlifting quite a bit. So you invented something very, very good. Congrats. Well done.
Well, intuitively, it felt right. It worked. I had a pretty good session, albeit quite short.
Awesome.
You don't need a lot of time if you're focused.
No, and I think what you did was smart. You picked 2 exercises.
Yeah.
If you're short on time and you try to go for too much variety, you waste time in setting up, warming up, you warm up again every set. That's the way to do it. What you did is just pick those 2 that you want to nail and create a more dense workout.
You're going to laugh, but sometimes if I go into a gym and it's very busy peak hour, and I can get a squat rack, I'll just do 10 sets of squats.
No, that's good. That's great.
Just because I know that in that certain block of time, I'm going to have more work in.
Yeah.
And
for someone like you, because you don't follow a program, that makes sense. If people are following a program, it's an easy way to just, walk into a gym and just decide to, okay, I'll just do 1 exercise today. Exactly. And then you actually can go backwards over time. But every now and then, I think that's intelligent.
You listen to the debate.
I did.
The seed oil debate.
Again, another thing that I did for you, like wearing glasses last episode, I listened to the whole debate. I did a big road trip on the weekend, so it served me to listen to a couple of hours on the road.
So I have some questions.
Yeah.
For someone, you listened to it or you watched it?
I listened to the first half. I watched the second half. And it was very different, actually. It was interesting. It was very different when you get to watch it. And
so you have some background knowledge about this topic, but you hadn't sort of deep dived this before. So this is, for folks that maybe haven't listened yet, this debate was between Tucker Goodrich and Dr. Matthew Nagra. And the debate was on seed oils. And so Matthew Nagra's position was that it is more reasonable to believe that seed oils are beneficial rather than harmful for coronary heart disease risk. And Tucker's position was the opposite. He considers these linoleic acid rich seed oils to be harmful. And this was a 4-hour conversation, a real deep dive. So I was sort of, when I finished that conversation, I was almost immediately thinking, how is this going to be received by people? So I'm interested to hear from you, listening through 4 hours of that, what you thought.
So firstly, I went into that episode honestly knowing nothing about
what was
the topic.
Your position?
I didn't have one. I was so neutral.
Okay.
That is one topic I've never looked into the research. To be honest, hasn't crossed my mind. I've seen people post about, PUFAs are polyunsaturated fats are a problem, and this is a problem, but I've never looked into it. I just didn't care enough on a personal level because I didn't think it applied to me. I understand the importance of a debate like this for sort of public health messaging or stuff going forward, but on a personal note, I was neutral. I came in, I didn't care who was right or wrong. I just wanted to know what the truth was.
But when you were part of the paleo community, you would have come across some of that sort of anti-seed oil rhetoric.
Not really. I think it was too early. I think I feel like it's more prevalent now, that sort of conversation. I think when I was doing the paleo stuff, it wasn't a huge part of the conversation. It was there. Of course it was there. Like margarine is the devil, butter is the hero. That was all that stuff was there, but it wasn't as scientific and zooming in on the science as these two guys did on your episode. So I thought going into it was going to be interesting. I wanted to hear who was right and wrong, or at least just hear who had a more compelling argument either way. It was grueling to sit through. No disrespect to Matthew or Tuck. It was just, let's just put it this way. It wasn't entertaining. Like, I wouldn't go out of my way if I had a spare few hours and I wanted to get a podcast in. It wasn't entertaining, but it was informative. And most of the sort of education points that I picked up weren't necessarily about the science or the details of the debate, but more the interesting aspect of hearing two people going toe to toe, how they go about it. That was interesting to me. But yeah, it was a hard listen, I got to admit. It was quite difficult to listen to, which I think is why you've decided that it's not is going on the YouTube or it's not going on the podcast. What's the outcome there?
It's on the YouTube.
Yeah.
So we're recording this, you and I, before the debate has been uploaded. But the plan is that it will go up on YouTube. I think that's the best channel for it because there was a lot of screen sharing. I think as a kind of audio only, it's going to be very hard for someone to follow for 4 hours. So I don't think that's necessarily the best way to consume it. So YouTube is where you'll find that debate if you want to sit through it. And then I guess the purpose of today, and certainly not the whole purpose of this conversation, but some of it is to kind of get our thoughts on the debate and what was put forward and, I guess what we walked away with personally. I think as a moderator, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
Sitting there, and it's a tough job actually.
Yeah.
Because it's very tough clearly just to listen for 4 hours.
Right.
But to listen, to track their arguments in real time and to be looking up references as well in real time, to be making sure that what they're saying is reliable and is what the studies are showing, and then to be able to jump in. I think in hindsight, I probably could have jumped in a little bit more. There were a handful of things that I just don't feel were really clarified.
Yeah. As a listener, I agree with that. I actually thought you did a really good job as a moderator. I could see that there were parts, in the debate where it was difficult, where you sort of had to interject just to keep it back on track, but in a way that was not biased, because whether you like it or not, I mean, there had to be a small bias there because you and Matthew are good friends and you've had him on the show multiple times. Was that the first time you've met Tucker online or spoken to him?
First time we've communicated through video. We've communicated back and forth on Twitter before, but it's very much a new relationship.
Yeah, so you had the rapport with Matt leading into it. So I thought, I knew that about you, but I reckon for people that don't know that you had rapport with Matt, you looked very neutral. Like you really played the role of moderator.
Well, I guess as well, similar to your position, I was really interested in just how two people are forming their opinions more so than the actual topic of this debate from me personally.
Yeah.
Because I don't sort of consume a lot of vegetable oils in my diet. And that's not necessarily because I think they're bad. We'll come to that. It's because if I'm consuming any sort of cooking oil, usually it's olive or avocado oil. So I think I was, even though I certainly have had been friends with Matt for a while now, and he's been on my show, I think I was relatively neutral in terms of who was going to present better evidence.
And you'd seen the studies leading in, right? Because they shared them ahead of time.
They even shared a lot of the same studies.
That's
which
something
was
I wanted to talk about.
Super fascinating.
That I found so interesting that they shared the same studies in support of their argument. So if let's say Matthew came to the table with a study that was refuting Tuck and then Tucker did the same, they actually brought the same studies to support their own argument. Some.
Yeah, there was some overlap.
Which was really interesting, which actually my conclusion on that sort of point is that I believe Matthew knew the smaller, finer details of the studies a little bit better than Tucker did, because it did support Matthew's arguments more strongly than it did for Tucker.
Yeah, I think overall, that Matt was probably a little better prepared.
I agree.
I think it would be fair to say that. I think that both of them certainly had a lot of evidence that they put forward, but I feel like Tucker was inconsistent in his thinking in a number of places.
Yeah. He contradicted himself numerous times.
And I have asked both of them to come back on.
And
so I'm happy for both of them to come back on, because there are these kind of 4 or 5 main points where I feel like there was some inconsistency in the thinking.
Yeah.
And I would love to have them both on to chat through those things further. To kind of, to date, only Matthew has said he's willing to come back on. So I'm waiting to hear from Tucker, but I'm still, open to having him back on, and maybe once he can sort of review the debate and there's some sort of time between that going up, he might be willing to do it.
I think for your sake and the listeners, it probably warrants a round 2, because I felt somewhat, it was inconclusive in a way. Even though there were some really good points made, it did not feel conclusive for me. And I left that conversation feeling very much in the same position that I was going into it, which was pretty neutral. If anything, leading towards Matthew's arguments. I thought his arguments were stronger. I think he put forward a better, more compelling case. But it wasn't by any means like conclusive. There was a lot of grey left in the conversation.
Yeah, I do feel though that Matt was able to answer everything that Tucker put forward, whereas there are a number of inconsistencies from Tucker, or questions that he just would not answer.
Totally. I thought that for me the most interesting part of it was their psychology, and look, to be honest, Tucker just seemed more emotional. He was getting flustered. He was sighing. He was, getting frustrated. He was kind of a couple times like sort of leaning into the computer and pointing the finger, like he looked like steam was coming out of his ears. And to me, Matthew was just composed. He was calculated. He had an answer for every question and an explanation for his answer, whilst I thought Tuck just a couple of times he was just dodging and dancing the questions that Matthew was asking, and he just couldn't really give a straight answer, and he would lean on sort of throwaway lines, like, that's irrelevant, or that's a tangent, or things like that weren't. There's that famous, is it Albert Einstein quote, which is, if you don't know it simply enough, if you can't explain it in a simple way, you don't understand it well enough. I butchered the quote, but it's something like that. I feel like Matthew could explain everything in a quite simple manner, and that Tucker every now and then try to sort of overcomplicate with mechanisms.
But there were, maybe we should go through some of the kind of top inconsistencies, and this could be instructive for anyone listening. So, from the outset, Tucker sort of makes it clear that he sees epidemiology as unreliable.
Yeah.
Right? That was very clear. And yet throughout the conversation, he introduced epidemiological data on many occasions. He introduced the paper at the end on olive oil.
Yeah.
That was, and there's many other issues within that paper that we can get to, but he introduced that as support of his position. And
have we mentioned what their positions were?
Yeah.
You did mention that? Okay.
And he harped on a lot about ecological data. And this was a big one. So they agreed that randomized controlled trials are the best level of evidence. So a lot of the debate centered on that. But then Tucker says at this point, he says, but Matt, how do you explain that vegetable oil consumption has gone up and cardiovascular disease events have gone up over the past 50 or however many years, right? Now, that's just ecological kind of data. That's epidemiology. It's very weak, saying these two things have happened and they're correlated. Therefore, that supports my argument. We know that there are many different influences or factors that could be leading to cardiovascular disease other than an increase in vegetable oils. Right. Now, so the first thing is that he just went to ecological data. And yet earlier he had established that he saw epidemiology as unreliable. That's an inconsistency in his approach. The second and perhaps more important thing here is he actually got that wrong. So it's interesting. If you look at cardiovascular disease events, and I have to shout out to Nick Hebert because he showed me this. If you look at cardiovascular disease events, Drew, over the past, say, 50, 60 years, they go up, right? But they go up because population has grown. If you look at that on a per capita basis, they're actually going down.
Right.
So if anything, Tucker's argument is wrong there. As vegetable oils have gone up, cardiovascular disease events per capita have gone down, as has cardiovascular disease mortality. So his own thinking actually works against him in that kind of position. But the main point being that when there's randomized controlled trial data, why are we then all of a sudden shifting the conversation to ecological data? It doesn't make sense.
Yes. And very early on in the debate, Matthew asked Tucker about his epistemics and what is his stance? What would it take him to have his position change or change his mind, or what is he leaning on to confirm his position? And he said clearly, human trials, preferably at the higher end of the hierarchy of evidence, being RCTs and meta-analysis of RCTs. And towards the end of the episode, he was citing ecological epidemiology, animal studies, mechanistic speculation. Like, it was just very inconsistent with his own standards, which for me was a huge red flag, one of quite a lot of red flags that I saw in Tucker. But that was a big one because he went against the grain of his own evidence hierarchy.
Yeah.
And I think Matthew stuck to it really well.
Yeah. And one of those epidemiological papers he brings up, both of them actually cited this. This was in both of their references. So I should say I had a set of their references prior to the debate that they had to submit. And both of them cited this recent olive oil paper looking at olive oil consumption and mortality. And it was looking at 2 US cohorts. And Tucker brought this paper up, and he pointed to the fact that in this study, olive oil, there was a significant risk reduction for mortality, those that were consuming olive oil compared to margarine and compared to mayonnaise. Okay? So that was Tucker's argument. He was saying that, well, mayonnaise and margarine contain seed oils, and in this study, mind you, this is epidemiology, which he's already said is unreliable, but he's saying in this study, people that consumed olive oil as opposed to margarine and to mayonnaise did better.
Yeah.
That's evidence that seed oils are bad.
Right.
Now, that's not true because we know that mayonnaise has a number of different ingredients in it, and margarine, we know that from 1960s and 1970s, margarine contained partially hydrogenated fats, trans fats, which we know have a deleterious effect on cardiovascular disease. And the cohorts in this olive oil paper were people that would have been consuming those.
Right. This was a 1960, 70 paper, right? Is that?
It's a new paper, but it's old cohorts.
Oh, old cohort.
Right.
Yeah.
So the margarine that they were consuming would have likely contained trans fats.
Right.
So what he overlooked was that paper also just directly compared olive oil to vegetable oils.
Yes.
And there was no significant difference between olive oil consumption and vegetable oil consumption in terms of mortality. The not just the primary outcome, but a handful of the outcomes that they were looking at. And so, if anything, that paper, even though it's epidemiology, he introduced it, that paper actually supports Matt's position, if anything.
Yeah.
Or at least suggest that the seed oils have a neutral effect relative to olive oil. Interestingly, though, even though there was no significant difference between olive oil and vegetable oils, it actually trended towards vegetable oils being better.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's all kind of interesting, but I think perhaps the most interesting aspect of the entire discussion centers on the LA veteran study. So you would probably recall throughout the discussion, Matt and Tucker agreed that linoleic acid, which is the main fat in seed oils, it's an omega-6 fat, becomes deleterious or problematic as you go from below 5% of calories to over 5% of calories.
Yep.
They set this threshold.
Yep.
Matt asks him, Tucker says yes. He acknowledges that as you go above 5%, that's when you're likely to see deleterious effects of this essential fatty acid.
Yep.
Now, here's the interesting thing. The only study that can answer that question is the LA veteran study. It's the only study where they have one change, that is the intervention group is consuming these seed oils or vegetable oils. The control group is not. They're consuming more saturated fat. And that intervention group goes from below 4% of calories to above.
Yep.
And also, I should note, this is an 8 to 10 year trial. So this is a long trial compared to some of the other ones that these guys were talking about, like Minnesota Coronary Experiment. That's a 12-month trial.
Mm-hmm.
So in LA veterans, what you see is about a 30 to 35% reduction in risk of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality in the group who was swapping out saturated fat and increasing their linoleic acid intake. And
was this Tucker brought this study?
No, so Matt brings this study up.
Okay.
And Tucker is aware of this study.
Okay.
Now, Tucker actually acknowledges that study does have a benefit.
Yes, I remember him saying that. He conceded that there is a small benefit.
So
yes.
There's two critical things. For me, this is where the debate was won and lost, right here.
Yeah.
Tucker conceded that yes, based on that study, there is a benefit. What he then says, which was really strange, you got to remember I'm moderating, I'm not in a position to jump in
Yeah.
and correct
Right.
or probe him. And he says, yes, but the effect size is small, right?
That's how I remember this.
And if you look at LA veterans and you see this 35% risk, relative risk reduction, and then you compare it to the study that Tucker says is the best study, Minnesota Coronary Experiment, the effect size in LA veterans is bigger than the study that he's saying is the best study out there. So that for me is another huge kind of inconsistency. But he did acknowledge that there is a benefit. So then Matt sort of questioned him a bit further about what he doesn't like about this study. And really, Tucker could not find any criticisms of this study. It's the most vigorous study and the only study that could get to the heart of the question.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tucker says something that I think was very, very strange. This was very strange.
Said a few strange things. Which one was this?
He says, but Matt, it was a blended intervention.
That's right.
Okay. So what he meant by that is that in this, in the LA veterans, the intervention group who increased their consumption of linoleic acid, they did so through a mix of seed oils, vegetable oils, and one of those was corn oil.
Mm-hmm.
And Tucker says, well, they included corn oil, and corn oil is not a seed oil. This seemed like to me was just a kind of a sort of get out clause.
Yeah.
And I actually think that corn oil probably is by many people considered to be a seed oil. But anyway, if you just look at the fat profile of corn oil, it's 57% linoleic acid. It's only 1% omega-3s. It is, it is representative of what we would consider a linoleic acid-rich seed oil.
Right. It stacks up to all of the other ones that he would consider seed
Yes.
oils. The profiles look almost the same. And throughout the debate, he did mention many times that he thinks that some of those blended oils, people are getting benefits from the omega-3 content in the oil, which is counteracting the negative effects of the omega-6 linoleic acid. But as you just mentioned, it's such a small percentage of omega-3.
Yes. It's a small percentage, but two things I'll add to this that just, I think, highlight some inconsistency. So he takes this position, basically this study, I think he realizes it gets to the heart of the question. It is showing benefit. His get out is to say, well, it included corn oil. Now, two things I'd say here. He does talk about the omega-3s. Interestingly, omega-3 tissue levels in that study were recorded,
and omega-3 tissue levels go up more in the control group than they do in the intervention group.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that omega-3s are not a potential confounder in this study, but I mean, it's interesting that the tissue levels of the intervention group were actually lower in omega-3 than the control group. And perhaps more interesting is that he takes this position that corn oil is not a seed oil. But 3 of the 4 main studies that Tucker brought to the table, the Minnesota coronary experiment, that's a corn oil and corn oil margarine, Sydney Diet Heart study, and the rose corn oil study, all of those used corn oil.
And exclusively corn oil.
So how can he be presenting studies
Yeah.
using corn oil to try and win the debate?
Right.
But then Matt presents this study that beautifully gets to the heart of the question.
Yep.
And he says, well, within that seed oil blend, it included corn oil, and that's not a seed oil.
Yeah, Matt presents a randomized control trial in humans with a long follow-up period.
It has the most person years, right, of any of those studies.
Yep.
Even though Minnesota coronary experiment had more people, because it only followed them for 12 months, the LA Veterans is a more powerful study.
So based on Tucker's epistemics that he mentioned in the beginning, Matt clearly met those standards when he presented this study, showed a clear benefit. Tucker then dismisses the study because of the corn oil, which then, to me, at that point, he has to automatically dismiss his own studies that he brought to the debate.
And
based off
really,
those standards.
2 of those, mind you, should already be dismissed because it is universally accepted that in the Sydney Diet Heart study and Minnesota coronary experiment, in their intervention group, they used margarine. This was in the 1960s.
Yep.
And so the intervention group that was given these linoleic acid vegetable oils was also exposed to trans fats.
Yes.
Right? So you can't use those studies as evidence that linoleic acid is detrimental when it is clearly confounded by trans fats.
Right.
And he says, well, you don't know that. But what we do know 100% by going back and looking at how margarine was made in the 1950s and 60s was that there was partially hydrogenated fats present in there. And that's not disputable.
If at that point of the debate, Matt said, well, what about the studies you brought? They use corn oil too. Because he didn't actually bring it up in the moment. I think
It's
that was
tough,
something
though. It's
retrospectively
tough.
that he
Yeah,
figured out.
Definitely. Well, I think, sitting down and kind of doing a debate live is very different to reading over things and listening in retrospect.
Yeah, it's true. Your brain's firing so fast. You're just trying to keep up with it. But I think that, just in hindsight, if Matt had raised that point about the corn oil being the exact oils that Tucker uses in his studies to show that omega-6 fats are causing, that they're not beneficial and they're harmful, that is where the debate is over, in my opinion. And the reason that I felt like it was not a conclusive ending is because that point was missed, which is unfortunate for Matt. But I think if they do a round 2, this will be a hard one to Tucker's going to have to come up with evidence or at least explain his own studies.
Well, he needs to explain why he wanted to discard that study because of corn oil, yet included his own studies that used corn oil.
Good luck.
He has to kind of explain that.
It's a hard explanation, man, especially when you come across as so contradictory. Just as a listener, I find it hard to trust his evidence now because he's stepped on his own feet so many times.
The other thing that he said, and this is certainly, I don't want it to sound like we're picking just on Tucker, but look, this is just the way that the debate went. I think Tucker's probably a really, really nice guy.
Yeah, and he's a hell of a lot smarter than me, I'll give him that. I mean, I'm as stupid as it gets, and he did a better job than I would have done.
Something else that he said that it did, I think, concern me a little bit, and it certainly seemed to concern Matt, was that he's not interested in cardiovascular events. So Matt presented some evidence showing that as you increase your linoleic acid intake, this is from randomized controlled trials, and decrease saturated fat, there's a significant reduction in cardiovascular events. And Tucker seemed to think that
someone having a cardiovascular event was not an important consideration.
Yeah, mate. This one struck a bit of a nerve with me. I got to be honest. In fact, this right here is what I brought in for this week's Get It Off Your Chest. Because, should we get into? Can I just go into it while we're on it?
Mate, get it off your chest.
Thank you. All right, here we go.
I actually don't have a get it off my chest.
That's all right. You don't have anything to get off your chest this week. That's fine.
Good.
There's no rules here. It's just if you have something that you want to get off your chest, now's the time.
I feel like you will always have something.
Well, I didn't until this episode. So thanks, Tucker. You've given me something here. So the fact that Tucker says that cardiovascular disease, like non-fatal events, don't matter to him, that he doesn't care. I think even his words were, I don't care about that. He only cares about fatal cardiovascular events. I mean, that was the point where I go, this guy's insane. Like, that is an insane remark. Especially, here's the thing that I want to get off my chest, and it's not just at Tucker, but I mean, seriously, like, to say that, what the fuck, Tucker? Like, what do you, how can you say something like that? What he's saying is that anyone who's had a cardiovascular event and survives, well, they survived, so that's fine. They didn't die from it. I don't care.
But they're at much higher risk of having a further event. It also
the psychological trauma,
mental state.
There's the family trauma of the people around them. There's so many layers to going through a near-death experience.
Cardiovascular rehabilitation.
Mate, the list goes on. Your father's had a heart attack. Carly's father's had a heart attack. My grandmother just recently had a stroke.
And it rocks people. It actually, going through an experience like that as the person, and I'm kind of, speaking on behalf of my dad here, but I think many people then put a ceiling on what they can do. They're scared.
Yeah.
And
their risk of a second one is increased. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. The risk of a future event is significantly increased.
And arguably that their life expectancy reduces. There's so many reasons to care about cardiovascular events, even if they're not fatal. But here's the part I want to get off my chest more than just that remark that he made.
Just before you get to that,
sure.
I just want to make one point here. And that is that, for example, if you take a 12-month trial of people aged in their 60s, like the Minnesota coronary experiment or other experiments, and you're wanting to see a significant reduction in mortality, you just haven't allowed enough time.
Yeah, good
right?
point.
So you're going to see cardiovascular events more easily in short-term trials.
Yeah, that's a good point. My biggest issue here is that you have guys like Tucker, like Sean Baker, Dave Asprey, is it? I get confused, Asprey, but I think it's got an R in it. Guys like that who, to me, they don't care about your health outcomes. They care more about being seen as a progressive leader in the space who goes against the grain and fights the scientists and doctors and flips the positions. They care more about elevating themselves as this leadership position of like a game changer. You got it all wrong. I know the answer. Than they do about your actual, events and your health. Because you see people like Asprey or, drink butter every day and he doesn't care what really happens to you. He's making a lot of money off that. He's built a business off it. He's got fame. It's a game. And that for me was the highlight of this part of the debate. And Matthew's response was clear that Matthew was offended by that statement. You could see he was offended by that statement. He has family who've gone through cardiovascular events and survived. And for someone like Tucker to say they don't matter to him, it's dehumanizing the people, in these studies. They're just numbers. They're just subjects. They're not people. So that pissed me off, and it sort of made me think about the greater sort of influencers out there who are non-medical, non-science, non-nutrition people who are preaching a way of living and giving public health information when they really don't care what happens to you. That's sort of what ruffled my feathers anyway.
Yeah, I often ask myself, why? Other than the kind of notoriety associated with kind of being known as the anti-seed oil guy or the butter in your coffee guy, like what is the motive, the overall motive here? And I think in the case of seed oils, I think a lot of this is that if I was to kind of speculate on where I think a lot of this comes from, because a lot of Tucker's argument was that it's oxidized LDL that matters, right? His mechanistic kind of argument, and he was saying that polyunsaturated fats, linoleic acid in particular, causes oxidized LDL. That was his kind of mechanistic speculation, right? And so I think what happens in this group that adopt these very animal-based low carbohydrate diets is they see their LDL cholesterol skyrocket and they need a way to rationalize that. And so this is a perfect way of rationalizing that. Instead of feeling uncomfortable because all of the evidence suggests that high LDL cholesterol, more specifically ApoB containing lipoproteins, is increasing their risk of atherosclerosis, they want to point to something as a scapegoat. And so seed oils are the perfect scapegoat because they're what cause oxidation of LDL, and that's what matters most.
Yeah.
Right? And I think we all know that the kind of current state of health is far more complex than something that can be explained by a single ingredient in food.
Yeah. And Matthew addresses that point numerous times throughout the debate. He actually says to Tucker at one point, he says, would you agree that isolated vegetable oil, say canola oil, is different to canola oil in an ultra-processed food with many other ingredients? And Tucker says no. He doesn't think, to him, it's the same thing. If the vegetable oil's in it, it's a problem, which means that in my eyes, he's picked one part of that food and pointed the finger of blame at that part, but ignored maybe the other 6 or 7 things that it could be, that might be related to poor health outcomes. So it's a clear reductionist approach when you can just say, yeah, it's all the same. And also, he kind of shoots himself in the foot because, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there saturated fat in mayonnaise as well? Because isn't there eggs?
Sure.
Right. So how can he blame the polyunsaturated fat in mayonnaise for being detrimental to people's health if there's also saturated fat in it and maybe sugar and whatever else is in it? So Matthew takes the position of we should be looking at these vegetable oils in isolation. So the canola oil you add, a drizzle to your stir fry is very different to the canola oil that you get
Definitely.
In a standard Western diet where it's coming from ultra-processed food. You just can't compare those two things. They're so different.
And that's where, so Tucker's falls back on this ecological data of just saying, look at vegetable oils. I explained that earlier. There's problems with that thinking. CVD mortality has gone down. If you look at it from 1960 to 1970s, it's plateaued recently, but overall it has gone down. And cardiovascular events per capita have gone down. But he's trying to pull the conversation away to this ecological data, and then Matt shifts it back to LA veterans because that is the study that looks exactly at the isolated effect of vegetable seed oils in the diet and how does that affect mortality and cardiovascular disease mortality. And as per Tucker's acknowledgement with regards to going over 5% of calories from linoleic acid being the threshold, that study tests that specifically.
Yeah, that study ticks all the boxes.
So everything comes back to that study. It's a very problematic study if you're going to take Tucker's position.
And at that point in the debate, if my memory serves correct, Tucker then leans on mechanisms again, which is a step backwards down the evidence hierarchy to try to rebut the point that Matt's making. And then Matt raises a great point and says, well, look how many mechanisms are involved in this process. There's 7, 8, 9, 10 mechanisms. You've chosen one mechanism to support your argument. How do we know that's the primary driver? That could be a secondary byproduct of a different mechanism. Or to point the finger at one specific mechanism,
it's reductionist
a big call,
because essentially linoleic acid could cause oxidation, but then it could have beneficial effects on a number of other pathways, and therefore its overall effect is a net positive, which is what you see in LA veterans.
Exactly. And so that's the point where Matt says, interesting mechanism, cool.
Right. But let's get back to health outcomes.
Let's look at outcomes. He kept saying, let's look at the outcomes because that's what the debate is centered around. Do vegetable oils benefit or harm people in terms of coronary heart disease? He kept going back to that. Look at the outcomes. Forget about the mechanism for a second. What do the outcomes say? LA veterans shows a clear benefit. And Tucker did concede, albeit very briefly. And then obviously it sort of, you guys transitioned out towards concluding statements.
Yeah.
And there was a point there, I got to say, you asked such a good question, which caused a moment of pause in both of them. But what you said was really interesting. You said, is there a chance that your position is wrong? Which takes a large dose of humility to say, yes, there is a chance. Matthew answers first and gives a really great answer. And of course, he says, yes, there's always a chance. But based on the evidence that I've brought to the table and the evidence available, I think I'm right. I've shown why. I've proven why. I've explained why. And interestingly, again, this is where the inconsistencies come back around, is Tucker says basically the same thing. He says, yes, there is a chance that I'm wrong, but I think my evidence supports, what I've said. And so hearing them both have the same conclusion, yet watching the previous 4 hours unfold, one of those answers seemed a little bit disingenuous. I do think Tucker probably could have conceded on a couple of pretty hard points there. And I wouldn't have said that he's definitely lost the debate, but they did warrant conceding a couple of times there, in my opinion.
Well, he certainly accepted the LA veterans. He said it's an effect. There is a benefit there. And then he kind of sort of downplayed it and said it was small.
Yeah.
But again, he was saying it's small while citing Minnesota coronary experiment, which has a much smaller effect size than the LA veterans. So that was inconsistent.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of like, how do you walk away from this as a listener? The way that I see this, and I look at all of the major guidelines, like the American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, the European Atherosclerosis Society, it's very clear that what matters most in terms of your risk of developing atherosclerosis, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, is the concentration, the amount of these atherogenic lipoproteins, right? And we hear about LDL cholesterol a lot. ApoB is actually a better predictor of risk, which measures all of the atherogenic lipoproteins. And what we know is when you reduce your saturated fat intake and you increase your intake of these polyunsaturated fats, you lower the concentration of these atherogenic lipoproteins, ApoB. And this is a quote I have from the 2021 European Society of Cardiology guidelines. They say the causal role of LDL cholesterol and other ApoB-containing lipoproteins in the development of atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease is demonstrated beyond any doubt by genetic, observational, and interventional studies. Right? So the consensus guidelines very much are in line with what Matthew's take on the evidence is. And so I walk away, certainly, I haven't changed my view on any of this at all. I think the rule of thumb of lowering saturated fats in the diet and consuming more polyunsaturated fats is a good one in terms of lowering your risk of cardiovascular disease.
I take the same position as you. I think from a personal stance, for me to change my vegetable oil intake wouldn't be much because I barely have any at the moment. Like you, I use olive oil more for cooking and avocado oil. And I tend to minimize oils in general. But I think this debate's not really about us. I think this is a bigger public health interest, which is for the majority of the population who maybe aren't as literate nutritionally as yourself or other people or the listeners even. Where are you getting your vegetable oil? How is it finding its way into your diet? If it's coming from ultra-processed foods, then yeah, the vegetable oil may be playing a role, but ultimately the matrix of what that oil's found in is the issue, is that ultra-processed foods shouldn't be making up the vast majority of our calories on a daily basis. And that, again, we just go back to whole foods and diversity. And if you have small amounts of these so-called harmful oils or other nutrients in your diet, if for 90% of the time you're on track and you're eating a healthy diet, I don't think we need to be, obsessing over these small, additions to the diet.
I don't think the fear of vegetable oils in their isolated form or the demonization is warranted.
Yeah.
The evidence, if anything, suggests benefit. So for me personally, I'm cooking with olive oil and avocado oil. And so I'm not really consuming seed oils or vegetable oils in terms of their isolated format. But at the same time, I'm not taking the position that they're unhealthy or poisonous.
Yeah.
They're just not a part of my regular diet.
Yeah. It's funny because when I was on a paleo diet, especially in the early days, I'd get most of my information from a leader in the space who would put up a blog post or would cite a study. And I would never look into the study myself. I would just take what they're saying as gospel and I would trust that they've done the work for me. And I got to a point where I was eating so much saturated fat that my LDL was really high. It came back after a blood test and was flagged as, significantly higher than it should have been. And it was very different to the trends of blood tests I've had, the 6, 7 leading up to that one. And I justified it in that moment by saying, well, because we did the subfractions and it turns out that most of my LDL was more of the fluffy, the large fluffy, less of the smaller, dense particles. And I'd sort of justified this high LDL. But I didn't know until speaking to you about it's the ApoB.
Yeah. So let's try and break this down for folks. There are a number of different atherogenic lipoproteins. Atherogenic lipoprotein, essentially what that means is these proteins in our blood that carry cholesterol and triglycerides. Some of them can enter into the artery wall and become stuck. They get retained in the artery wall and you can develop plaque buildup. Those ones that get stuck we call atherogenic. So there is LDL cholesterol or LDL particles that most people have heard of. That accounts for, in most people, about 90% of these atherogenic lipoproteins. And that's why on your standard blood test, that's what you would see. But as research has progressed, we've realized that other lipoproteins, IDL and VLDL, they're also atherogenic, and they also meet this criteria of being able to enter the arterial wall and become retained and contribute to the development of plaque. Now, the commonality of all of these atherogenic lipoproteins is the type of protein. And so this protein is called ApoB for short. Mm-hmm. And so now you can request, and I actually had blood work done recently, and I requested ApoB for the first time, and you can get that measured. Cool. Which gives you a kind of more accurate prediction of your risk of developing atherosclerosis.
Are you happy to share your results, or is that something?
I actually have.
Awesome.
I think I printed them out here.
Because you have had blood tests done fairly routinely over the last few years, right? Since being on a plant-based diet. Mm-hmm. You're just quickly going back a step. So when I had that high LDL, I justified it because, my paleo expert told me that it was totally normal and totally healthy. And then we did the subfractions, and getting those subfractions done, again, gave me even more confidence that I was healthy and fine. But my question to you is, if my LDL is elevated, I think my total cholesterol was 6.8 maybe. And now just having been plant-based for 3 years, it's like 3.4. It's had a huge drop. Would it have been problematic if I kept my LDL as high as it was, above the normal reference range for year after year after year, even though it seemed like most of it was that fluffy, buoyant, healthy LDL? Do you think that's a problem?
Well, it really comes back to the number of particles, which is what ApoB
So without getting ApoB done, I wouldn't know. Is that
so? For example, you could have two people with the same LDL cholesterol. One person has more large fluffy.
Yep.
The other person has more small dense. And because that other person has small dense, they're going to have more total lipoproteins, which means more ApoB, more potential to enter and become retained in the arterial wall.
Okay.
So there is some truth to that large fluffy is relatively better than small dense.
Right.
But ultimately, what is absolutely understood is that the lower the ApoB, the better.
Okay.
So you could have, say, raised LDL by doing a low carb style diet, and it might be, you might have more large fluffy, but your ApoB is still higher than what it would be if you adopted a higher carbohydrate diet, a more plant-based diet with unsaturated fats, for example.
Yeah.
That's a real possibility.
Okay. Makes
So it's kind of compared to what?
Yeah.
My ApoB came in at 76 milligrams per deciliter.
Okay.
And so I think I've mentioned on this show quite a few times that when you look at a whole range of studies, be it observational or you look at clinical interventions where they lower people's LDL cholesterol, when you get LDL cholesterol down to about 70 milligrams per deciliter or lower, that's where you really don't see atherosclerosis. Or in the case of these drug intervention trials, you see regression of plaque. You see that plaque dissolving away.
Yep.
Now, 70 milligrams per deciliter of LDL is equivalent to about 80 milligrams per deciliter of ApoB. So
You're
my
under
ApoB came in at 76, so I was quite happy.
Fantastic.
With that, it probably could be even a touch lower. I would reduce my risk a bit, but overall, I'm quite happy with that. And I did get asked from several people about what my diet kind of looks like.
Yeah.
I think I eat probably a little bit of a higher fat plant-based diet than many people, a lot of people that I speak to anyway. I seem to do, certainly it's not low carb, but I have a stronger emphasis in my diet on protein, so plant protein, the legume food group. There's quite a strong emphasis on that. And then I do have quite a lot of fats in nuts and seeds and olive oil, avocado, etc. So I think relative to, I guess, the quote-unquote typical plant-based diet, mine is a lower carbohydrate format. It's by no means low carb or ketogenic. But I'd say in line with like a Mediterranean diet, but completely plant-based.
Yeah. I think I'm very similar to that. So macro-wise, I'd say, it varies, but 40 to 50% of calories from carbohydrate, maybe 25-ish from fat and protein. I think that's where I'm at the moment.
Yeah, mine would be similar.
Yeah.
So I guess takeaway point here in terms of getting bloods done, ApoB is a good one to request if you can. If you haven't had it before, worth asking your physician. There is another test, non-HDL, which is pretty much identical to ApoB, and a lot more sort of standard laboratory tests will include that. So if
is that LDL and triglyceride or what?
So non-HDL looks at essentially at you remove HDL and it gives you a look at all of the atherogenic lipoproteins, the ones that I kind of reeled off before. So that's an option if, for example, ApoB is not available or it's expensive or something like that. And then the other test that I did for the first time was Lp(a). So Lp(a) is a type of LDL cholesterol, but it's not really driven or influenced by our lifestyle. About 90% of your Lp(a) is driven by genetics. So it's not something you have a lot of control over.
Yeah.
So you probably only really need to measure it once. That's the current advice that I've come across anyway. And so my Lp(a) was very much in range, but I think it's a good one for people to get because if, for example, it is high and it's controlled by your genetics, there are drugs you can take to lower that.
Okay.
And having that elevated does significantly increase your risk of developing atherosclerosis.
So remember when your dad had his heart attack and you were told that, it runs in the family, it's likely genetic, that your risk is high. Do these results somewhat counter that rhetoric that you heard early on? Because it seems like that your genetic risk is not as high as
well, based on that genetic kind of marker, but maybe we don't fully appreciate all of the different genes that affect cardiovascular risk, right? Yeah. So I'm not sure I'm bulletproof from a genetic point of view, but this is a very established marker for cardiovascular risk that we know 90% of this value is driven by genetics in most people. So I think it's given that it is kind of well established in the literature, I think it's worth getting, particularly if you're someone who has a family history of cardiovascular disease. I'm probably going a little above and beyond what the typical person might want to.
Yeah.
But I saw my dad have a heart attack at 41.
Right.
So I kind of feel like I want to leave no stone unturned as I approach 41.
Yeah.
So I've done this as a kind of more comprehensive blood test. It, of course, included triglycerides and HbA1c and fasting glucose and
Can you share
CRP and everything. I posted it on Twitter if anyone wants to see.
Right.
But everything was
what was
very
A1C?
much in range.
You know me and my glucose
numbers. It's in millimoles per mole.
Millimolar?
So it's we'd have to convert that.
No, see, I'm only knowing it as a percentage. I don't even know what that is. All right. Well,
we can convert that and report back.
Fasting glucose, was there something there?
4.6.
Yeah, see, bang.
Millimoles per litre.
Beautiful. With all those toxic carbs as well, mate. Well done.
Yeah, so I'm kind of going to probably not test LP(a) again, but I will continue with yearly blood work, particularly on these cardiovascular disease kind of risk factors, just to check in.
Yeah.
And I am actually going to do a CT angiogram.
Okay.
Yeah, which again I think is potentially a little bit, I don't want to say neurotic.
Yeah.
Because I'm not that concerned, but given my dad's history, I want to just have a look in there and see if I have any soft plaque.
Sure. Yeah, detect trends and patterns. I mean, even if you did it now and then in a few years or even a decade, you'd be able to see. Because I'd imagine an angiogram is not going to show you large changes on an annual basis, right? It takes time to develop the plaque. So I guess if you do one now just for peace of mind and then...
Yeah, it's a set and forget. It's a kind of precautionary thing for me. But overall, my approach to health is very much the opposite of being neurotic.
Yeah.
I feel so healthy right now.
Yeah.
I feel just so grateful for my health.
Yeah.
And I tick the boxes of exercise and sleep and just eating consistently. It's not perfect, but I kind of don't feel the need or want to fall into that trap of always searching for better health.
Yeah.
I see that mentality in the biohacking kind of section of health and wellness. And it makes me think, if you get caught up in that, are you ever happy with where you are?
Yeah, mate. To me, the biohacking space is a bunch of people who are just chasing their tail. You're never satisfied. There's always something new to hack, whether it's blood glucose related and wearing CGMs, whether it's heart rate and HRV. And there's non-stop data that you're collecting through device after device after device. And it's just this numbers overload. And I actually think that for people who aren't equipped mentally to deal with that amount of data coming in, it can be detrimental. If you wake up every day and your smart device tells you you slept like shit, your HRV sucks, you've got stress levels through the roof, your blood glucose is 0.1 millimole higher than it was yesterday, people take this data and it will impact you on a daily basis. You'll go through your day going, I slept badly last night. My workout's going to suck today because I'm underslept and my HRV is not great.
Limiting beliefs.
Mate, limiting beliefs. I think that the biohacking realm, whilst I understand why people want to collect data to learn more about the body, that's cool. I understand that. But how much weight do you give it on a daily basis? And is it even possible consciously to let go of that data once you've seen it? Once it's entered your mind and you know what your data is for the day, can you let go of it and go and have a great day after that? Some people can't. I think it's only for a small clique of people. And I also think that there's something in, again, positioning yourself as this like progressive, health-seeking, truth-seeking leader. Look at, I've got a CGM on this arm, and I've got a watch on this wrist and this wrist. And I check my ketones and my blood lactate in the middle of a workout. It's like, come on, guys. At what point can we just enjoy the day?
Yeah.
That's where I'm at with the biohacking. It's just exhausting, man.
I think, certainly you can use some of that stuff and have a healthy relationship with it. Like I've got an Oura ring, for example.
Yeah.
But I do feel there is a trap of, your health is never good enough. and always looking for the next way to kind of hack your way to better health or that longevity compound.
Yeah.
And it takes you out of the present and feeling grateful for your body and what
so
you
true.
can do today, right now.
That's so true. I think that when I got diagnosed with diabetes, instantly, I felt so sad and sorry for myself that I hadn't appreciated my health in the years leading up. Literally the second I was diagnosed, I was like, wow, life was so good.
You thought you took it for granted.
Well, I knew I didn't because I still exercised all the time and I cherished the moments, but not to the depth of when you get diagnosed with something or you have a health condition and then all of a sudden when it becomes real and you think, because at that point I didn't understand that I could still live a great life. I thought life was over when I got the diagnosis, and I sort of looked back in the rear view and I thought, God, life was good.
Yeah.
I wish I could just have it back like that. Even if it wasn't perfect, it was so good. And I think that, again, the biohackers maybe need to just take one step back and just look at how good life can be.
I guess to play devil's advocate to our position here,
Yep.
some may argue that using some of these tools can help you prevent losing your health.
For sure. That's a good point. And I would support these tools for that reason. I just think it comes down
It's
to
a fine
healthy
line though.
balance.
When does it become too much?
I think only the individual will know. I know that for me, and I spoke about this last episode, I believe, or maybe the one before, I can't remember now. I think that when you start making lifestyle changes and decisions that actually impact your mental health, your physical health, your feelings of well-being in pursuit of some numbers on a blood test or on a CGM, that, it's the forest for the trees. You really need to try to balance out these multiple factors that make up feelings of wellness, because I chased flat lines for many years with my blood glucose. I was obsessed with the data. I would skip meals to stay flatlined. I mentioned this in the last episode, but I think it's relevant for this conversation. And this is something I've never said on air, and I'm about to say it right now. There was actually a point where I was so overtrained and undernourished that not only did I start to hate the feeling of exercise, and I found it very, very hard to even force myself to exercise, but my willpower was so strong that I was skipping meals and exercising all the time, especially to correct my blood glucose, that I crashed my testosterone. Like, absolutely so bad that when I got my results back, my mum's a doctor, I showed her the results. She thought there was something sinister. She was worried that I had potentially something really...
I think you told me about this.
Yeah. I've never said it publicly, but I ran myself into the ground, and I had extremely low testosterone levels, zero libido, felt terrible all the time, but I was just chasing good data so that when I went to my endocrinologist, she wouldn't judge me and she'd be proud of the way I managed my diabetes, which is just, kind of gives me chills even saying this. I can't believe that I was doing that, but you get stuck in this rut where you're just trying to be better and better and better, which may come from a good place, that pursuit of excellence and try to be your best. But at some point, you've got to let go of perfection. You have to, because it does get in the way, not just get in the way of progress, as the saying goes, but actually sends you backwards. So I got to a point where I was actually unwell, far more unwell than when I was sort of early on diagnosed with diabetes. So
probably takes quite a bit of self-awareness to be able to check in with yourself to say, am I really enjoying my life right now?
It does take self-awareness, but it's also very hard to see it when you're in it. You can see it when you look back, but when you're living with yourself every day, every minute, you don't see it. And by the time you do recognize it, it's often far too late. I mean, I managed to turn around and I fixed it almost entirely. But yeah, it takes, you have to let go of that willpower. The strong willpower that gets you in that position is something that you actually have to kind of let go of and trust the process and go, you know what, I'm going to get back to good health. My willpower got me into this trouble. I can't be perfect anymore. I'm going to have to let go. And for me, the couple of things that sort of made me notice that I was doing proper damage was my insulin I'll call it resistance in this case because I believe it is exactly what this is. I was under so much stress and fatigue that my insulin literally stopped working. I remember one day I was on a photo shoot and I was so upset and I felt so terrible. And the photographer kept saying, mate, you got to soften your face, try to be a bit more smiley. Like you look real, are you okay? And I wasn't okay. My blood glucose was 14 when it was meant to be 5. And I'd given dose after dose trying to correct it, and it was flatlined at 14. So I remember giving a 4-unit dose, and there's a thing called rage bolusing in type 1 diabetes, which you're told do not do. So rage bolus is when you're so angry with your 14 that you've seen on this blood glucose meter or whatever the CGM that you give a dose of insulin, and then you check again in an hour, and then you see that it's still 14, so you give another dose, right? The problem with that is insulin only peaks at 1 hour. It's still got 2 hours left at least to start doing its job and working. So you might overdose your insulin because you haven't seen your blood glucose come down yet.
And then you have a low.
Then you have a crashing low, really dangerously. So there was a day when I rage bolused. I rage bolused 4 doses in a row within an hour of each dose. Didn't budge. My blood glucose was stuck at 14. I knew something was so wrong at that point that's when I sort of had a wake-up call, and I was like, okay, I need to actually get some blood tests done, see what's going on. And that's when I found the low testosterone, poor glucose control, all of those things. So it's been a roller coaster, man.
Hey friends, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. A quick message from one of our sponsors who makes this show possible, and then we'll jump straight back into things. If you're familiar with my nutrition philosophy, you will know that I'm a huge believer in plant-rich diets being better for people and our planet. You'll also know that I frequently draw attention to what I describe as nutrients of focus. These are nutrients that science shows plant-based eaters, whether plant predominant or exclusive, can fall short in, which can leave you feeling run down, lacking energy, experiencing brain fog, and generally just not as vital as you'd like to be. For that reason, together with Emil, a plant-based health and wellness company, I formulated Essential 8. Essential 8 is your one-stop multi-nutrient, formulated with DHA, EPA, omega-3s from algae oil, vitamin B12, iodine, vitamin D3, iron, zinc, selenium, and calcium to perfectly complement your plant-rich diet. I personally take Essential 8 every morning with breakfast, just 2 capsules, much easier than supplementing with these 8 key nutrients individually. What's even more convenient is I have a monthly subscription, so it turns up automatically on my doorstep and I never miss a beat. To get yours, head to theproof.com/friends. That's theproof.com/friends, where you'll find a link to purchase Essential 8 that will get you an extra 5% off your first order on top of the significant subscription discount. There will also be a link to this in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. CGMs. That brings us to one of those papers we wanted to discuss today.
Yeah.
I want to come back to a sleep study that I wanted to share with you.
Yeah.
But let's cover the CGM. It wasn't a CGM study, it was a HbA1c
Correct.
paper.
Yeah.
But we were speaking about, in the previous episode, you and I were chatting about whether there is an advantage for someone that doesn't have diabetes or pre-diabetes to work towards sort of flatlining and achieving a lower average blood glucose compared to a higher average blood glucose, with both of them being within the physiological norm reference range.
Yeah.
And we kind of said we don't think that there is an advantage. You could have a higher average blood glucose, but within the normal range, and outcomes would be similar to a lower average blood glucose within the normal range. But we've gone away, and you've got a study to share here.
Yeah, I've got to say this study was sent to me after the episode. Somebody who's a doctor looked into it and sent it across. I hadn't seen it, but it does somewhat confirm what we speculated, which is that the lower the better is essentially storytelling at the moment, and that there's not enough evidence to actually support that. We do have the paper here in front of us, but and I will just say I haven't gone through the whole paper word for word yet. I've done a skim over it, and I usually don't even want to talk about a paper until I've read it thoroughly and really asked a lot of questions. But there are a couple of graphs in here that are just fairly eye-opening, and in general, what you see here in this paper is this sort of hockey stick or J-shaped curve. It's more of a hockey stick where within the normal range it's a very, in terms of all-cause mortality, I think is it cancer
mortality and CVD.
CVD and cancer. So the hockey stick shape remains true for all of these three outcomes. And the inflection point in which the risk starts to increase occurs at about a 5.7%, which is an HbA1c of 5.7%.
Which is like the lower threshold for being diagnosed with pre-diabetes.
Right. So if you are within that normal range, whether you're 5.6 or even here, it looks like about a 3.5, so even low, it's as flat as can be throughout that range, which is really interesting. So just for example, when you got your blood glucose back, I don't know what your A1C is, but your fasting blood glucose was 4.6. A keto proponent would probably say to you, Simon, you can do better. You can get that lower. You can go down to 3.9 if you really try. But at what cost? That's the question. At what cost?
And what data supports that as being clinically beneficial?
Well,
based on that paper there, if you're sort of high 3s up to 5.5, there was no significant difference.
Right. And relating this back to the story I was just telling about how I ran myself into the ground with overanalyzing data. So let's say I challenged you and said, listen, man, I want to see you get that fasting glucose down to 3.8. What are you going to change in your lifestyle, right? You'll probably cut your carbs. You'll try to flatline every day. You might exercise a little bit more to even reduce it further, in the long term. But let's say you do what happened to me and you crash your testosterone and your quality of life sucks and you hate every day-to-day that goes by. What is the health effect of that, right? So yeah, you may have hit that low number, but what's the impact of having low testosterone for years upon years and all-cause mortality and all these things? So I just think we need to understand that it's often going to be a seesaw. And that if you go really extreme on one thing, you may see something else get out of whack.
And the pursuit in the first place of getting that
unjustified,
lower appears to be unjustified.
Right. It's a cool story, but can you show me hard evidence? At this point, we haven't seen it. So yeah, it was a good paper, I think.
So do you think then that, to go a little layer deeper, that time in range is a better marker than whether your HbA1c is sort of more towards the upper end or lower end of the normal range?
For people with diabetes, I would say yes. It tells you a lot more about your diabetes management. For the general population, I would tend to think that the same applies, that time in range is far more important, or area under the curve is another way people like to say it. I do think that's more important. I think that whether you're 5.6, 5, 4.8, or 4 as an A1C, those numbers tend to all be associated with pretty good health outcomes. And that depending on how you want to get your blood glucose a little bit, like let's say you are 5.7 or 5, like kind of on that cusp, then yeah, I would say get your A1C down a bit. Or if your A1C is 6 or above or 6.5 and you've met the diagnostic criteria for type 2 or pre-diabetes or insulin resistance, then yes, absolutely. We want to see the A1C below that 5.7%. But the lower the better at this point just seems to be somewhat of a myth, and time in range should be more of a focus. I would recommend people to definitely stick to time in range a lot more.
So with all of this in mind and that paper, does that change your view on CGMs and their use in folks without diabetes?
It doesn't. I still have the same view in that you're going to get a lot of data that's just going to show you that your blood sugar's fine and has probably always been, and it's not really going to help you, live your life any differently. Mate, do you know how many times when I used to do finger pricks, I'd, be at a dinner party or out with mates and I'd test my blood glucose and everyone at the table was like, hey, test me, as if they just want to get a piece of the diabetes world for a second. So I'd, set up a new Lancet and I'd prick their finger and I'd check. How many people brought back a blood glucose out of the range?
None.
Everyone was like 4.6, 4.8. Like most of the time, people don't need to worry about this. Like you're not going to see a crazy number that's, going to diagnose something that you weren't aware of. Like most people have a perfectly normal, really great blood glucose level. So, I think that if you want to tell yourself that you're perfect all the time, just stick on a CGM, wear that for a year, and you'll see how good your control is. But it's not going to show you these crazy fluctuations and spikes. This is, where this comes from? I was thinking about this the other day. It comes from the semantics around the glucose conversation. So these keto guys and low carbers, they use the word spike, right? To them, spike means you've shot your blood glucose so high that it's outside of the normal range, right? What they don't understand is they're actually using this word interchangeably with, or it's synonymous with, in proper terms, a glucose excursion. Okay, but the word spike
so much more emotive,
right? You've had a spike; it's a bad thing.
You spiked your glucose.
Yeah, you've shot
bad
up,
boy.
Yeah, you naughty boy. You've spiked above the normal range, and watch this: you're going to come below the normal range, and then when you're below the normal range, you're going to get hungry. You're going to eat the cake. You're going to spike again. So,
is there anything informative though, in terms of how quickly it does go up and how quickly it comes down?
Well, I think there has been, I think you actually shared this with me offline, a paper looking at oral glucose tolerance tests in that first 30 minutes, the response in the first 30 minutes. There is something informative about that. But in the general pop, there's actually two schools of thought here, right? I've heard both of these. Number one is that you actually want a really quick increase and a quick decrease, right? So that you come back to range quite fast, and that the area under the curve will actually be very similar to someone who has this slow and gradual increase, stays up for a little bit, slowly comes down. When you compare area under the curve, they're actually quite similar, right? So let's say you have a higher spike in one case, but it comes down quickly, compared to a less elevated glucose excursion, but it's up a little bit longer and it takes longer to come back.
Imagine some people, though, would say the latter example would be better for suppressing your appetite.
I don't know if that's true within the normal range. I think both of those, with matched area under the curve within the normal physiological range, assuming they don't both go into hypoglycemic territory, I would argue that there's not a huge difference.
That's something else for us to check.
More homework. I like it. We'll find something to help us with that.
I think I mentioned last episode, but for me, the use of these in folks without diabetes or pre-diabetes, I just want to see a study where you put these CGMs on folks' arms and you objectively document the quality of their diet.
Yeah.
If diet quality is improving in a way that we know is associated with better long-term health, I'll wear a CGM myself.
Yeah. Mate,
I'll put one on both arms and both legs.
Mate, you're spot on. I think that I don't know if we'll see that study, but that is...
No, we have to see that. That's a basic study. No, that's a basic study.
Yeah. I mean, what you've just thought about there is going beyond...
It's not reductionist.
No.
It's just, let's zoom out.
Yes.
We give these gadgets to folks. What happens to their food choices?
Yeah.
Are they better or are they worse?
Yeah. And we look at other outcomes as well. Yeah, I mean, that could be a cool study. Maybe we can pull some strings, man.
So you had another study you wanted to share on insulin correction.
Yeah, so my study of the week that I brought in is, I came across this study in preparation for a talk that I'm giving in the next few weeks for a CGM company.
Where's that talk?
It's
CGM
online.
company.
It's online. It's a virtual talk.
Hashtag sponsored by CGM.
It's not sponsored, but it is.
Are they going to be happy about this episode?
Watch spilling the beans too early. Oh, this is for type 1 diabetics.
Okay.
Right. So I'd assume that they'd be pretty happy to hear this kind
Sure.
of stuff. But even if they're not too bad, this is my opinion.
I wonder if they're branching out to folks without diabetes, because part of me thinks that a lot of this is also a market expansion. It's an opportunity to make a lot more money.
Yeah, I was thinking about that from the perspective of these manufacturers of these products. The fact that they're becoming so commercial across the population is actually really good for their bottom line. Like they're loving this. Essentially for them, I'm not saying that they want more people with diabetes, but if their product is being purchased by people with diabetes and now the general pop are purchasing them, I mean, it's kind of very profitable now.
I'm going to throw a question at you on that.
Yeah?
So there's probably two ways of looking at this. And I got this from a blog you sent me. We can probably link to that That was a great,
Yeah, it was
great read. But some might be thinking, well, okay, that's a great thing for people with diabetes because if more people are buying these, it'll bring the price down. But then I'm sure others are thinking, no, they'll sell more, but they're not going to drop the price.
Right. I don't know if I can actually comment on that from like I haven't thought about it deep enough, but I understand what you're saying here. I do understand
Check your
that.
contract.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to breach my contract. No, but I understand that, like the economics of it. That does make sense. I think where people are getting kind of pissed off is people with type 1 who are struggling to pay their $4,000 a year for the CGM.
Sure.
It's a life-saving device. And you get these guys who are just using them, throwing away $4,000 a year, who don't have diabetes, and all they're getting is perfect numbers.
Is that how much people are paying?
It's about $4,000 a year.
If you don't have diabetes to get a CGM?
Yeah, it's the same as what I would pay.
$4,000.
Yeah, for a year. That's wearing it every day.
I'm not
going
to put one on both arms and
but
both
hold on.
legs.
If you only wear it for 10 days or 2 weeks, it'll be a few $100.
Gotcha.
Right. So if you wear it every day for a year.
Right.
Yeah,
but if I do both legs, both arms,
you're paying $16,000. Correct.
$16,000.
So don't do that. That's not intelligent. So what people with diabetes have noticed is like we are wearing these CGMs that literally save our life, right? And we're forking out the money every year to keep us alive to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a keto biohacker who also wears a CGM all year round. It doesn't save their life. It's just a fashion accessory that sort of...
But is that really a problem if they want to spend their money on that as long as it's not affecting the supply to people living with diabetes?
It's not a problem.
It's not really a problem.
It's not a problem.
But wouldn't it be great though if it did open to more people, we did find out it improved diet quality, and then it drove the price down?
Yeah. And if that was the case, I would be supporting them and everyone using them. Look, at the moment, I'm not offended if people want to. Like, I'm not offended. We're having a laugh and we're sort of being, we're taking the piss a little bit. But like, I actually don't mind if you wear it. I just think don't then take your numbers and give advice to other people about the importance of these numbers if you don't even understand what they mean or how they correlate. I think that's sort of one of the takeaways there. So back to this study is, I brought in this study this week, which, like I said, I'm including in my talk. But this is really interesting, and this also circles back to my workout this morning. I was explaining how I went to climb the rope, right? I'll tell you that the title of this study is Optimal Insulin Correction Factor in Post-High-Intensity Exercise Hyperglycemia in Adults with Type 1 Diabetes.
Can you translate that?
Yeah, so in English, what that means is when people with type 1 diabetes perform high-intensity interval training, 90+% of the time they see their blood glucose elevate towards hyperglycemia, into the hyperglycemic or high blood glucose range.
Which, of course, then scares people from doing such
Yeah,
exercise.
because now you're out of range, so your time in range is now higher, and it might affect your A1C long term, and it doesn't feel good being in a hyperglycemic state, and how do we get it back down in the normal range? There's so many questions that
What does that
raises.
feel like when you are in that state? Just so if someone's listening who is not living with diabetes, can you explain it to them?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, it feels terrible, absolutely terrible. You basically feel like you have sand in your muscles or like sand in the gears, right? So the system feels heavy and sluggish, and you can get sort of reflux, like a burning sensation, lethargic, exhausted, like your eyelids are heavy. You can have fuzzy sort of like vision where literally the glucose in your eyes impacts how your nerves are working, and you can see spotty, fuzzy vision. It doesn't feel good. And you don't perform well either.
Explain from a physiological point of view, why do most folks living with diabetes, when they do HIIT training, experience these states of hyperglycemia?
So when you start doing an anaerobic form of exercise or where your heart rate is above, in the literature they sort of vary it between above 80% of your maximum heart rate or even above 85% of your maximum heart rate. That form of training is what's called glycolytic. In other words, it requires glucose as the predominant fuel source, right? So let's say you jump on a rowing machine and why don't I explain this protocol actually that they use? Because I thought this was a really interesting protocol, because this actually is a real world protocol. A lot of the times in exercise physiology and sports science, you see you see lab tests that, may not indicate what people would actually do in their training, like a VO2 test. How many people are doing a VO2 max test in their day-to-day? You don't do that kind of training, right? Which is an incremental increase in intensity for like 7, 8, 9 minutes until you quit. That's a VO2 test, right? For this one, this was a 25-minute HIIT session, right?
And the purpose of this study was to establish what can be done to help people return to a healthy blood glucose level following a session of HIIT training.
Exactly. So, and why is a study like this even important is because in general, most forms of exercise that aren't high intensity cause people's blood glucose to drop very rapidly. And what that does is it creates this element of fear and anxiety around exercise, whereby people with type 1 diabetes actually exercise less than the majority of the population.
Out of fear.
Out of fear. There's an extra barrier to entry, right? So this study is looking at a couple of things. It's saying, well, if you're scared of exercising due to going low, high intensity interval training not only isn't going to make you go low in 90+% of cases, and in another study I saw it was even like 98% of cases, but it will actually make your blood glucose increase. So you don't have anything to worry about. Don't fear going low. You can enjoy the benefits of exercise. You can get the great cardiovascular benefits of HIIT training and the aerobic, because you do get, even though it's anaerobic by nature, you do get anaerobic benefits post-workout in the recovery, and especially if you follow a program for weeks and months. So it's basically saying, look, we might have another option here for people with type 1 to exercise. However, when you are in a hyperglycemic state post-exercise, how do we get you down safely, right? Because most people understand that when you exercise, you become more insulin sensitive. So you might have to reduce your insulin dose. That's after sort of moderate or low intensity, steady state training and moderate intensity training and gym training, that kind of stuff. But this is like a different world. And what they showed here is that when people did a 25-minute HIIT session 4 times per week, and the way the workout was structured was pretty good. So they did a 5-minute bout of 30 on, 30 off. Right? When you're in the on phase, you're above 80% of your heart rate max. And when you're on the off or the kind of active rest phase, you're at around 50%. All right.
What could you know what kind of exercise? But is it like assault bike? And
this
rowing?
one was cycling. It wasn't assault bike. They use sort of like cycle ergometers in the gym. So the first round of 5 minutes, you do 30 on, 30 off on the bike. You then rest for 5 minutes. For the next 5 minutes, you do 30 on, 30 off, but it's a circuit of 6 bodyweight exercises, sort of like a CrossFit style workout. Burpees, box jumps, those kinds of movements that get your heart rate.
F45 also qualify?
Correct. Like typical circuit training with sort of light loads, higher reps, keep your heart rate above 80% while you're on. So they did 30 on, 30 on for another 5 minutes doing exercises like we just mentioned. Another 5-minute rest, and then the last bout, they went back to the bike and they completed the same one that they did in the first bout of exercise. So it's 3 bouts of 5 minutes with 5 minutes in between.
So 30-minute total.
Yeah, so it was a 25 minutes total.
25 minutes total.
Yeah. Then, at the end of the workout, they look at people's blood glucose, and they saw that in 90% of cases, everyone was above what they determined to be the hyperglycemic state, which was 8 millimoles, okay? If you were above an 8 millimole, what they wanted to see was how can you give an insulin dose that will correct you back into the normal range? For them, the number that they wanted to get people back down to was 6, right? That seems a little higher than the normal range, but it was a very safe number to pick for this. You don't want to try get them down to a 4 because if you over-administer insulin and you go to a 3 or a 2, you're in big trouble. So they picked a 6 as it was safe and it's considered the normal range. The way they figured out the dosing was what I found really interesting. So there's something called the rule of 100. For people without diabetes, this is going to sound like Spanish, but basically you take your total daily dose of insulin, which in my case, because I'm using multiple daily injections, I'm not on a pump, I have a basal insulin that I give at night, which is like my 24-hour background insulin. So I give that injection at like, say, 6 p.m. I take, at the moment, I'm on about 9 or 10 units. And then you plus that number with the daily insulin you take, which is called your bolus insulin, which is the insulin you have with your meals, right? So for me, let's just say my total daily is approximately 20 units or 25 units of insulin, somewhere in that range. It'll vary day to day. You do 100 divided by that number. That gives you what's called insulin correction factor. right? That's the amount of insulin that you can give to drop your blood glucose by a certain amount. So then what they do is they figure out the dose of insulin that each subject's going to take is the blood glucose that they're currently at, because everyone's different after a workout, right? So you might, let's say you have to type 1, you might get your blood glucose up to 13 from a HIIT workout. I might go to a 9 or whatever, right? So you would do, let's say you were a 13, you'd go 13 minus 6 because you want to get down to a 6. So you've got 7 millimoles. That's the number you want to reduce by. That's the gap. You would then divide that by the insulin correction factor, which is the rule of 100 I just mentioned, and that'll give you a number. Now, what they did was they said to the subjects, they split them into 4 groups. They go, we're going to look at one group that does this HIIT workout, and at the end of the workout, they do nothing with their insulin. They give no insulin. Let's see what happens. Do they keep going up? Do they flatten? What it showed was not only did they rise above the normal range into the hypoglycemic state, but it actually continued to rise. And the net change over the next 3 hours was another millimole up. Okay. So there was no real risk of this like delayed drop from HIIT training, which is a really cool finding, which gives you confidence that if you do HIIT training, you don't have to freak out that you're going to have a massive drop later. I mean, some people do, everyone's different, but for the most part, you're going to stay elevated. The other 3 groups, you either gave 50% of your dose that we just calculated, 100% of the dose, or 150% of the dose. That number's kind of scary because you've figured out your insulin correction factor that should get you back to normal. And now we're saying, all right, take 1.5 times that, right? So it kind of gives people a bit of a hesitation here, right? They then measured over the next 3 hours and up to, I think it was 24 hours, what happens to their blood glucose. And I mean, the results were unbelievable. The group that had the best control and ended up in the normal range was the group that took 150% of their correction factor. So what this tells you is that HIIT training can actually not only make your blood glucose go up, but it actually makes you require more insulin, right? And this goes back to non-diabetics wearing CGMs. So you know the insulin carbohydrate model of obesity. So the same idea that people take with glucose control, they apply to insulin. They say the lower the better. Keep your insulin as low as possible, right? Well, by that standard, you shouldn't do HIIT training if you care about keeping your insulin as low as possible. Because even in healthy subjects, I found another study looking at HIIT training, their insulin response was bigger after HIIT.
To respond to that increase in blood glucose.
Right. And why does the blood glucose increase, which I didn't even answer your question 2 hours ago, it feels like now.
I was going to bring you back.
Okay, I'm back. The reason your blood glucose increases is because the liver is responsible for providing glucose for the body during states of anaerobic or glycolytic exercise, meaning glucose is the predominant fuel source. It's not a fat-burning zone that you're in here, right? This is glucose-centric. So the liver provides the glucose. The rate of glucose appearing in the blood exceeds the rate of disappearance into the muscle.
Which all comes back to where your heart rate is.
Correct. That's why they always use heart rate as sort of the proxy. That's the main measure for whether or not you are going to have a lower blood glucose response to a exercise or a high blood glucose response to an exercise, or whether you'll be stable, right? Some people are stable.
That seems like useful information for someone with type 1 who's about to do exercise to understand, well, where's my heart rate going to go in this session?
Yes. Here's the limitation, though, that I've sort of noticed with this paper. The subjects here did their exercise in the fasted state in the morning with no insulin on board.
I was going to ask you about, so this whole strategy is about after the exercise,
Correct.
Give insulin.
That's right.
But what would happen if you had a pre-training protocol with administering insulin or some other form of potentially exercise or a warm-up prior to HIIT?
Yes. Okay, so let's go through a couple of those. So yes, this is like a retrospective look back on, okay, we've come up to this level, let's get back down. I'd love to see a study looking at like a preventative strategy or a prospective sort of outlook where, here's the trouble though with this. It's very hard to predict what your blood glucose is going to do during a HIIT workout. It's impossible actually to say, I know that if I start and my blood glucose is 6, at the end of the workout, I'm going to be 13. It's impossible to know. And if you do take that guess and you give that insulin correction factor up front, what if you're wrong? What if you weren't going to go to a 13, you only went to a 10?
And when you say it's impossible, just for people listening, let's say I go and do HIIT frequently, 3 times a week. I have type 1 and I'm able to see where my blood glucose goes during all those sessions. Do I then start to understand how HIIT affects me? Or is what you're saying is that it's impossible because where your blood glucose goes in during that session is not just determined by the HIIT training, but also what did you eat prior? How was your sleep? All of that.
Mate, you nailed it. You're basically a diabetes educator. Congratulations.
That's what happens after 3 episodes with you on this.
Nailed
deep diving.
that, mate. You're exactly right. So yes, you should look for trends and patterns. So what you would do is, this is what I would say as an exercise physiologist or giving diabetes education. Detect some trends and patterns over weeks and months. The more data, the better here. So if you have type 1, go do that HIIT workout in the fasted state. Keep as many variables as possible that are constant. Fasted state, no rapid insulin. Do that HIIT workout. What did you start at? What did you end at? Average it off. Let's say on average, you do go from 6 to a 13. All right. Problem is now, did you sleep well the night before? Have you had caffeine in the morning? Was it a black coffee? Was it a coffee with milk? Are you stressed? Did your insulin dose even go into the part of the body that absorbs it the same as another part of the body? There's so much to take in here, which is why it's risky. I think that's why these studies aren't there yet, the preventative strategy, the sort of upfront insulin. So what I would say though is, and I can tell you what I did today for my rope session, because when I climb rope, if I don't give insulin beforehand, mate, I'm seeing a spike. And when I say spike, I mean spike. I'm
so
saying
the rope is a form of HIIT training.
It's interesting. You can't categorize it as the same HIIT as this, but the intensity and the adrenaline of being 10 meters above the ground hanging from a rope and the all out, it's a maximal effort. It's essentially like a sprint set just using your arms. So you're climbing as fast as you can to the top. It's very anaerobic. You can hold your breath the whole time, right? Your body's got enough ATP to get you to the top and back down, maybe even twice. But as soon as you let go of that rope, you're gassed, right? So you've got this like oxygen debt that happens after you've done this session, right? But the response of the liver is really similar, for me anyway, for a rope climb as it would be for a HIIT workout, or even some people find this with strength training. So I've got a friend, Jessica, in Canada, who's like the greatest female powerlifter in the world at the moment. She also sees huge spikes on competition day when she's doing powerlifting, right? So it's not just jumping on a bike and sprinting. Like this can happen from very high intensity strength training or any other forms of exercise, right? So obviously I did my rope session today and I was thinking about this study and I was thinking, what is the safest way for me to do my little N of 1 study? Do I want to give 150% of the insulin correction factor up front? No, that's risky as hell, right? I don't want to do that. But I want some insulin on board. So I thought I'll go really, really conservative and I'll give half of my correction factor. Because again, like you just astutely pointed out, I do see a very consistent pattern of my blood glucose elevates when I do the rope, and it's always about a 6 to 8 millimole elevation, which is quite significant, right? Especially if you start at a 6, man, I could go up to a 14. I'll give half of the insulin correction factor up front. And I've got a CGM on, so if I do go low, I know that I'll be able to track it. I've got glucose nearby, so if I'm going low, I'll just straight away eat glucose and flatten it out. But today was amazing because I took 1.5 units of insulin. There was another variable though that I threw in there, and I had a black coffee as well before the rope, which I know spikes me as well. So it felt to me like a safe dose, 1.5 units, small amount of insulin, and I flatlined the whole workout. Did not move at all. So I was really happy with the response, my glucose response to the workout. I took a bit of a guess with the insulin dose and it worked really well. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've had diabetes for so long. So I encourage people with diabetes to, be willing to take this experiment to the sort of like, as you mentioned, that prospective way of doing it, where you can sort of find a trend and pattern and very safely and conservatively put some insulin on board so that you can have a workout where you don't spike and you perform better when you're in the normal range and you feel better. So it's a solution.
What would you say the main take-home point of this study would be for someone with type 1 diabetes?
There are a couple of good takeaways here. Number one is that if you're somebody who does go low very often from exercise, this is a great option. You're very unlikely you're going to go low. You can do high-intensity training, provided it really is high intensity. Here's
heart rate 80%.
Yes. Make sure you're doing this properly, because if you do this, but you think you're doing high intensity, but you're actually in the moderate intensity aerobic, maybe even zone 2, You got to know how hard this is meant to be. This stuff hurts.
Well, there you go. That's where a little gadget can be helpful.
Yeah.
One of these gadgets.
Yep, that's true.
Check your heart rate.
That's absolutely true. So check your heart rate, figure out what your 80% of your max is, or your heart rate reserve, however you choose to do it. Know that you can do this kind of exercise and not worry about going low. So then you get the benefits of exercise without saying, you know what, I've got type 1, it's too dangerous, I'm never going to exercise again. All right, so this is great. Another thing you can do is you can actually use HIIT training, or not even HIIT training, I'd call it sprint training, because the study I found was called sprint interval training, SIT, S-I-T. You can use a very small sprint before and after a bout of low intensity or moderate intensity steady state cardio.
To correct.
Yeah, to
Bring it back up.
prevent the hypo. So you start with a hard sprint set. In the study I found it was only a 10-second sprint, but maybe you want to do a 20 or whatever. All out effort.
That's a great point. Like imagine you were experiencing hypo, right? But you couldn't access any food. Would you go for a sprint?
Yeah, if that's all you've got, absolutely. If that's all you've got, and I know people who have done this. So another point just on this topic is that a lot of people with type 1, what you do is you stock up on glucose before your exercise. Let's say you're about to do a low intensity or moderate intensity run or cycle or whatever. Most people know they're going to go low, right? So you either adjust your insulin beforehand, you take a smaller dose at breakfast or lunch, whenever it is, and or you eat glucose so that you give yourself some buffer space to drop. People don't want to eat when they're not hungry. People don't want to just put calories in because they think they're going to gain weight. So they just say, well, you know what, I'm just not going to exercise because I don't want to eat a whole bunch of glucose before my run. It just defeats the purpose of going to burn those calories, which that's not my opinion, just to be clear. There's way more to exercise than burning calories. But this is another option. So instead of eating the banana, maybe you could try a really hard sprint before your moderate intensity training. That way you don't have to put calories on. Your liver will present them for you. Do your workout. You'll probably trend low during the workout and then finish with a sprint so you can bring it back up without having to eat jelly beans or stuff. So there's a lot to come out of this study. And I'm really excited to actually present this when the talk happens in the next few weeks.
Very good. As long as you've still got that contract.
I'm not under contract yet. I haven't signed anything.
Should I tell you about this sleep study?
Please do. I just hogged the mic. Sorry about that.
No, that was great. I think that was really instructive. Okay. So, new paper just came out, published, looking at how does sleep, or sleep deprivation, I should say, affect energy intake, energy expenditure, and also adiposity, weight gain. So really interesting study, essentially trying to ask the question, if you are sleep deprived, will you consume more calories? Will you expend less energy? Will you gain weight? Where will that weight be? And this study was set up in a way to answer all of this. And the hypothesis was that as you deprive someone of sleep, they will consume more calories. There's a bunch of research that's looked at that. This was an interesting trial for a few reasons. It was published in the Journal of American College of Cardiology maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago, so it's brand new. And it was a randomized crossover trial. So it had 2 phases, and crossover, meaning that every participant got to experience both phases. So there was a sleep deprivation phase, and I should say these were healthy adults aged 19 to about 40. They were non-obese. 2 phases. One was the sleep deprivation phase. The participants were sleeping 4 hours a night. And this is in a sort of inpatient setting, like a metabolic kind of ward where... Very controlled, right? You can see they're measuring energy expenditure, exactly how long people are sleeping, and all the food they're eating. So sleep deprivation phase, 4 hours sleep a night. That's a 2-week phase. And then there was the other control phase where they slept 9 hours a night.
2 weeks of 4 hours a night. That sounds unethical, mate.
Yeah, that's tough, right?
Tough, yeah. 1 hour of 1 sleep of 4 hours. I'm
dead.
So
obviously these folks that signed up got remunerated. I hope they did. Handsomely. But so really interesting design. And I should say there's 3 months washout between the 2 phases. So people did the 2 phases in random order. Some people did the 4-hour first and then the 9-hour sleep. Others did it the other way, vice versa. But either way, they had a 3-month washout period, a gap between the 2 phases, just to allow people to get back to baseline.
Yeah.
So what they found was super interesting. And I think there are some instructive kind of takeaway points here for us. Firstly, when folks were sleeping 4 hours a night, on average, they consumed 308 more calories per day. And
significant.
Yeah, and there is a few kind of hypotheses that may explain this. But again, the authors of this paper, they kind of speculate a little bit, but they say that this is far from fully understood.
Do they specify, were the calories from like larger portions or were they seeking out unhealthier foods?
Interestingly, what they found specific to food was that 308 calories was mostly from fat and protein.
Interesting.
And it was an ad libitum study, so people could essentially eat whatever they wanted, as much food as they wanted. And
do you have a theory on why they seeked out
fat
and protein?
Well, maybe.
Something just came to mind for me. But
Tell me.
I'm thinking, so one of the most important parts of sleeping is to repair, cellular repair and regenerate cells, right? And like heal, and the body recovers. If you're not recovering, maybe you're seeking out amino acids or proteins to try repair damaged cells. And that's why they go for protein-rich food, which happens to also be packaged with fat. And they end up eating more of that kind of food. Totally just theory that I just made up.
That does fit with Professor Stephen Simpson. I had him on the show, and David Raubenheimer, and they wrote a book called Eat Like the Animals, and their research was able to show consistently across many different animals that we have the strongest appetite for protein of all nutrients.
Interesting.
Which is fascinating. The researchers here kind of hypothesize that there could be a few explanations. It could be changes in various hormones that are appetite suppressing or enhancing. Although in this study they didn't see that, but other studies have. So it's an open question. It could be heightened reward systems. So parts of the brain that are associated with reward, more activation. So you have this enhanced kind of reward activation with unhealthy foods, very fatty foods.
Right. So you get that dopamine hit.
Yes.
Find more food.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of the theories. And then there is another theory that, people are just awake for more hours and therefore can consume more food.
Right.
So there's a few different kind of reasons for why people who were sleep deprived consumed more calories. Now, what's really interesting is that during that 2-week period, compared to when folks were sleeping 9 hours, the sleep deprived group gained about 0.5 kilogram. But then they did a DEXA scan, and it actually wasn't a difference in fat. Both groups actually gained a similar amount of fat. This is where it's really, really interesting. The sleep deprived group preferentially developed visceral fat, fat around their organs. And we know that visceral fat is associated with elevated lipids, triglycerides, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, cardiovascular disease. Most physicians will say it's better to hold on to a bit of fat around your hips and your butt than it is around your abdomen for that reason. Yeah. So I think this study, and again, it just builds on many other studies out there, it highlights the importance if you are trying to manage your body weight, or perhaps you want to lose weight, that's a goal of yours, to not just think about the food that you're eating, but to also think about your sleep routine.
Yeah.
Because if you're sleep deprived, if you're not focusing on that, you might be making it harder for yourself to consume maintenance calories or consume less calories than you need if you're trying to lose some weight.
And you know what's crazy? This was just in 2 weeks.
Right.
2 weeks to have a significant, visceral fat change. Imagine poor habits over a lifetime. You can see why people get chronic illnesses over years and
Definitely.
decades. Like this is a 2-week trial.
Yeah, I think 15% of the population has type 2 diabetes, 25% non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. These are diseases that are affecting a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it's a reminder that our health it's very multifactorial.
Absolutely.
Nutrition's important, but here we see that sleep is very important.
What about the 9-hour group? What did they find?
So this was all relative to that.
Oh, okay.
So the differences that I explained are relative to the 9-hour group.
Right.
So I think some kind of tips here for folks that are thinking about their sleep and want to improve it, and high level stuff, but I do plan to explore it more, is dimming the lights before bed, getting the room nice and cold.
Yeah.
Doing something, and I think this is a really important one, doing something that helps you feel relaxed and not agitated. So for example, maybe having a sauna or reading a book that you like, or even watching a movie. I know people say, screens are bad, but I think it's what you're doing on the screen that's really important.
I agree.
I think if you're watching something that gets you into a good mood versus using a screen and going on Twitter and getting agitated.
Yeah, like don't look at a Stephen Lin post before you go to bed because you're not going to sleep.
Right. So I think, just do something that makes you feel relaxed in those hours going to sleep before bed.
Yeah.
And then also with regards to food, trying to stop eating a few hours before bed.
Yeah. I would add probably 1 or 2 things to that. So one would be you could use blue blockers if you want. So it could be on your screen or goggles. It's super dorky, but they work.
You can turn the brightness down on your phone as well, and you can change the type of light.
Amber settings and stuff. Another one which is interesting is the cooling effect of when you go to sleep. As your core temperature drops, it actually helps you fall asleep. So some people recommend having a warm shower or a bath to get that body temperature up a little bit. And then when you get into bed, don't cover the blanket, cover yourself. Leave your feet and hands out so that they can cool. And as the heat radiates out of those parts of your body, it can help you fall asleep.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's why I put sauna in there as opposed to ice bath, which probably isn't the best for most people before bed.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think those are good tips. I think I do a lot of those and they certainly have helped me. So that's good.
And then one other is in the morning, setting your circadian rhythm by when you get up, try and get outside. And I know your dad speaks about this as well with his work, but try and look out to the horizon.
Yeah.
Look, far away, get that natural light exposure. You don't need to look directly into the sun.
Yeah.
But just getting out and getting that natural light exposure will help set your circadian rhythms, which will then be very important for later on in the day when the sun's going down to help your body get into a kind of hormonal state that allows you to fall asleep.
And when you get that early sunlight, I believe that through sunglasses does not have the same effect. You actually want that natural light filtering in. Of course, you're not going to stare at the sun, but having natural light hitting the retina, not filtered through a sunglasses lens is probably important too.
You mentioned Stephen Lin. He's not back for the silly post of the week again, is he?
Look, you brought him into this. I brought someone else. This has turned into the Stephen Lin podcast. This is unbelievable. Look, you've got to start this one. This is your turn. I know what you've brought in.
Well, Stephen Lin, he actually don't have the post here. I'll pop it up on the YouTube so it pops up.
Yeah, Jamie, pull that up. Yeah. You need a Jamie. How good is that?
We've got Cameron here.
No, but like an in-house Jamie. There's a screen. That'd be cool.
Jamie, if you're looking for a career change, if you want to
some people have no idea what we're talking
shows.
about. Jamie's Joe Rogan's what do you call him, producer who brings up.
I might poach him.
Yeah, that pull that up, Jamie, has just become a phrase that everyone uses. So
we'll headhunt him.
Okay.
So Stephen Lin, he's back, and again, I'd love to have Stephen on the show. The offer is always there. He did a post that I found mind-boggling, and it was on the Mediterranean diet, and he was essentially saying that Mediterranean regions eat a lot of meat and that a Mediterranean diet is a hoax, and that you can't believe people that say a Mediterranean diet is associated with lower risk of cardiovascular disease, chronic illness is better health, essentially. And I'll share that post so you can see his exact words. But what he is overlooking is that in nutrition science, by and large, in the majority of studies that exist on the Mediterranean diet in nutrition science is defined. There is a clear definition for it. And in fact, there is a Mediterranean score that is used in studies. And so this...
Sorry, can I interject one sec? My understanding of his post was not saying the Mediterranean diet is not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying the health benefits that Mediterranean diet that you see on it is actually not due to the foods you think it's due to. It's due to all these other foods that he mentioned. So I don't think he says it's not a healthy diet. He's just saying that the way we categorized it is bullshit and that it's actually the way he's decided to categorize it. Is that how you saw it as well?
Yes, but the problem lies with how we define the diet and score it within the literature and what we see, right? So there is a clear Mediterranean diet scoring tool which essentially gives more points to diets that contain olive oil, fresh fruit, vegetables, fatty fish and seafood, legumes, tree nuts and peanuts, and will, again, give you a higher score if you're limiting foods like wine or baked goods or butter or red or processed meats. Okay? So, in fact, in the literature, you get a better score if you limit red meat on this,
right.
Okay? Now, so when you look at that and you look at populations who score higher, according to that criteria, are healthier. They are people that are limiting red meat, okay? So his approach here is just a complete misunderstanding with regards to how the Mediterranean diet is characterized in epidemiology and how it's defined and this scoring tool. And, one only has to look at the Lyon Diet Heart Study, which is one of the most famous randomized controlled trials that exists. And the intervention group in that study, this was a secondary prevention study. So folks that already had cardiovascular disease, the intervention group adopt a Mediterranean diet that is rich in fruits and vegetables and fatty fish and legumes, and has limited inclusion of foods like red meat and butter. Mm-hmm. It's much more rich in unsaturated fats and low in saturated fat, and they have a 70% reduction in cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
So this idea that the Mediterranean diet being a very plant-forward diet that hasn't been shown as a healthy eating pattern by evidence is just crazy. And so
to call it a hoax is just it's literally the opposite of what the diet
did he use the word hoax? I think he did.
I think he did. But so his recommendations were they eat a lot of pork.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was basically a red meat heavy, very high saturated fat diet. Essentially what a carnivore diet looks like nowadays, like the kind of trendy carnivore diet. So he was saying that everything you know about Mediterranean diet and the literature associated with the great health outcomes is not because of the thorough scoring point system that you just mentioned. It's actually due to the pork that they eat.
And here's the thing though, those people are captured in these studies, and the people that are eating lots of pork and lots of red meat, they score lower on the Mediterranean score.
Yeah.
And we see that those people have worse health outcomes.
Right.
So it's not as though the research is not essentially looking at these people who do in Mediterranean regions who do consume more animal foods. They are included in these studies.
Exactly.
They just score lower on the Mediterranean diet score, and they do worse.
Yeah, that's bizarre. Again, it's one of those people who are trying to be a leader, go against the grain. They know something that the consensus doesn't know. Listen to me, buy my product, which brings me on to my silly post of the week, which is essentially this theme is just so well aligned with these guys, these quacky guys who just put utter garbage into our social media feeds. So my post of the week. Utter garbage. Dave Asprey, Mr. Bulletproof Coffee.
He's come up twice in this conversation.
I know. I'm so sorry to do this to everyone. But this was fantastic. This is something that, again, this segment's meant to be hard to find the silly post, but it's just too easy at the moment because people are tagging us and things, and we get. But anyway, this one landed in my inbox. So this, I wish I could play it because you have to hear him talking about what it is.
For years, I've been talking about how kale is bad for you, but people say, "But Dave, vitamin K." Well, there's a new product that's pretty cool. It's called Kale Buster. And Kale Buster is from Vitellia Life. And what it does is it has K2 in it, not the weak K1 that kale has. Kale's full of oxalic acid. It pokes little holes in your gut, and it's tied to painful sex and joint pain and kidney stones. So why would you do that? What I like to do is take Kale Buster instead. It even has grass-fed beef liver in it, which is way better for you than kale, as well as more K2 than you'll ever get from that nasty, bitter green evilness. Kale Buster is what it's called, and it works. Go to Vitellia.com to learn how you get a free bottle of Kale Buster, and you can save 10%. That's VATELLIA.com. Use code DAVE10.
But essentially, I'll summarize it. Dave Asprey puts up a post. From memory, the front said, stop eating kale, take this supplement instead. Huge red flag. When you see that, when someone tells you to stop doing something that you probably know to be healthy and to buy my supplement instead, red flag. I would immediately either scroll on, or when you do listen, take it with a huge
Sounds
amount
like
of
lectins and the anti-lectin shield supplement.
You see it everywhere. Exactly.
From Dr. Gundry.
Exactly.
It's create a problem and then sell the solution.
Yeah, invent a problem. That's right. Yeah, exactly. A post about this new supplement called the Kale Buster, all right, which essentially he says...
It's not called the Kale Buster.
No,
surely.
it says that on the package. Kale Buster on the package, I swear to you. So his position is, and these are his words, I quote.
I think this is a joke.
It's not a joke.
I think he's having a stitch up here.
Maybe he's trolling all of us.
I think
but
so.
I bet you some poor ignorant people bought this product. I guarantee it. His words are, kale is trying to kill you. It's poking holes.
No, this is a joke. We have to stop.
It's poking holes in your gut, and it's linked to painful sex. Kale is linked to poor Kale. What did he have to do with any of this?
Where is the evidence for that?
Mate, where was the study where they tested people's genitals after sex who'd been eating kale? I mean, it's so bizarre to even use those two things in the same sentence. Anyway, he's selling a Kale Buster, which is essentially...
This is taking us to an all-time low.
I think it's going lower and lower each week. We'll see what happens next week. But so this supplement contains one of the K vitamins. You know a lot more about this than I do. Maybe you should actually explain this part because I don't want to butcher it.
Well, I can't really recall this post in detail. I know that I got tagged into it as well.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing that he was putting forward, so two things. This supplement, it's a K2 supplement,
K2
right?
supplement.
Okay. So K2 is considered a non-essential.
Yeah. Non-essential vitamin. Yeah.
Right? Because your body makes it. Your microbiome will manufacture K2.
Okay.
And so it's not something that is recommended for, the population at large.
Yeah.
There are small subsets of the population, for example, postmenopausal women with low bone density. There is some evidence to suggest they might benefit from including K2 as a direct source of K2. But again, I can't remember all of his points in his post, but he was talking about how animal foods contain K2 and plant foods don't, or not many plant foods do.
Because what's the form in kale? K1, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, K1.
Okay.
So he's setting this up as, kale doesn't even contain K2, and here's a K2 supplement, and you can take this and not worry about
all the things about kale that's trying to kill you, like the oxalates and
so
the
take
anti-nutrients.
This and you can sleep at night because kale's not trying to kill you. Kale's not trying to murder you, okay? And so he sets it up, he frames it as, this is a superior type of vitamin K. But again, K2 is not considered an essential nutrient.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talks about how animal products contain K2, and I'm not sure if he mentioned, but natto is a plant food that does contain K2.
Mm-hmm.
But this group often does overlook an important point here, and that is that the vitamin K2 in animal foods is a form of K2 called MK4. It's the bioavailability of this is very, very, very low.
Mm-hmm.
You absorb a tiny amount of it. The form of vitamin K2 in natto, the plant-based food, is MK7, which is very, very bioavailable.
Right.
That often gets overlooked in this, but it's kind of irrelevant to this whole point anyway.
Yeah.
Because the main point is people don't need to supplement K2. That unless they are a postmenopausal woman with osteoporosis or osteopenia, or perhaps some very, very rare circumstances where someone has a severely disrupted microbiome and cannot produce it. But I am not aware of any evidence, good evidence, that suggests that people should just supplement K2 routinely. So he's kind of just fabricated this whole story out of nowhere, and the product's called Kale Buster.
Yeah, I mean, he did exactly as you mentioned what Gundry did. He picked he reduced a food down to a nutrient. So Gundry reduced beans down to lectins, or tomatoes down to whatever.
But I understand Gundry's line of thinking a bit more, because lectin shield,
it actually,
as silly as it
counters
is, it is meant to be a shield against the lectins you eat.
Yeah.
But Kale Buster, his product was just a vitamin K2 supplement.
Yeah, this isn't like a take this tablet next time you eat your kale salad.
No.
It was ditch the kale, take this instead.
The product has nothing to do with kale. And it just, I have no idea how they sat down in a room when they were developing this product
Put kale
and
on
came
the
up
label.
with Kale Buster as the name. Honestly, if there was an award for the worst name for any supplement in
agree.
the world, that's right up there.
I agree. I think Lectin Shield is far more appealing than a Kale Buster.
Yeah. I think Gundry has done, as much as I despise the kind of train of thought and this idea of scaring people off lectins because the evidence isn't there to support that, I think their meeting and their marketing and branding is much more convincing and makes much more sense.
Yeah.
Kale Buster, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah. I mean, look, the point here is that if someone is inventing a problem and selling the solution, be careful. And the fact that this man has close to 500,000 followers and can reach a large audience is kind of scary. So to those out there that are following this guy, understand that he might not be providing intellectual evidence-based public health advice, and that
might is, I would say, a bit generous.
Sorry, that is generous. He probably isn't, definitely isn't. And you can probably get away with eating your kale and you'll be fine. Your sex shouldn't be painful. And I think your gut will also remain intact.
And you don't have to put butter in your coffee.
Yeah.
In fact, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
We've got a few things off our chest.
This is great. I feel so much lighter. This is awesome. All right. Should we counter that segment with some good news?
We should.
Okay. End on a high. Have you brought in any good news?
I told you before, and not that anyone else is actually interested in the fact that my squat has come good.
It's funny you say that because you want to know what the good news was that I'm bringing in on your behalf is your step count has improved so much.
Actually, can you
where's
pass
your
me my phone?
Yeah.
And we're going to do a versus.
I don't have the app.
Oh,
I don't have
convenient.
The health app.
Convenient.
I deleted it because I knew you were going to challenge me.
Convenient.
No, seriously, I don't have that app.
It's a default.
But I deleted it on purpose.
Today.
No,
you were worried.
Months and months
He
ago.
was worried.
Months ago.
I understand.
I wear a device, which conveniently is dead.
Oh, okay. I'm on a bit of a streak.
Yeah.
So here's the last 5 days. For background, we spoke about the mortality benefits with increasing steps and the fact that mortality benefit continues beyond 10,000 up to 16, 17,000. So 5 days ago, I did 15,926.
Solid.
That's up there.
It's up there.
I then followed that up back to back, 12,751.
Solid.
Decent.
Took a step back, but to take 2 steps forward.
The next day, 12,715. So consistent.
Yeah.
The next day, 13,765. And then yesterday, a little bit less, 10,653.
Solid. But there was a day when you did close to, it was over 15, close to 20. I remember you showed me, you sent me a screenshot. But
yeah,
I want to know.
16,947.
How are you getting these steps in? That's what I want to know. Like, what have you changed?
I don't have a car.
So you were forced into this.
I have no car this week.
Did you choose not to have a car?
Yeah.
Or you like, as in, did you say, you know what, not having a car is probably going to help me with getting my steps up, or just conveniently?
Well, I'm living now between Byron and Bondi. My
So car's
car
in
is in
Byron.
Byron.
All right.
And I figure that when I'm in Bondi, I don't need a car.
No.
So I just walk everywhere.
Yeah.
And the gym that I've been going to, that I've been enjoying at the moment, as you know, is up at Bondi Junction.
Yeah.
So that's a fair walk.
It's uphill the whole way as well.
Yeah. So these are
good.
these are not any
These are not
ordinary
flat,
steps.
Yeah, these are not flat steps.
These are
ladies-
far from ordinary.
These are
ladies and
hills.
gentlemen. Yes.
Yeah, I'm proud of you, man. That's
I mean, it probably tells me how many flights. It tells me everything.
yeah, it should actually.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting how you just change one slight thing in your lifestyle, and all of a sudden that step count can just go through the roof? Are they spread across the day, or do you think you're getting them in one big bulk? So I'd imagine your pre and post workout, you're getting a ton in.
Mm-hmm.
What about the other hours of the day? Are you getting a morning walk? Are you doing all that?
Pretty even.
Okay, that's good.
I don't sit down that much.
That's good.
I wouldn't sit down that often for more than 90 minutes without getting up and doing a bit of moving.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Have you got any good news?
Well, that was some good news that I brought in for you, but some headlines that I came across.
It would have been bad news if your app was working.
Yeah.
I'm sure of it.
No, mate, my steps through that, mate. I don't want to embarrass you, but
Yeah.
I doubled.
I mean, if I was able to do more steps than you,
it's unlike, look, you don't have your dogs here. I've got a very active dog who I walk twice a day. I play golf, 18 holes at New South Wales golf course, which is a very hilly, beautiful golf course in the national park. So I get 15 to 20,000 just at golf.
yeah. Well, next time, bring in the app so you can support that with some
bring
evidence.
in some evidence. Okay, anecdotal n equals 1 evidence. Is that good enough on
Yeah.
the hierarchy? All right,
Yeah.
I'll bring it in. So my good news was a couple of headlines I saw. One of them was that RM Williams invests $20 million in a plant-based leather maker. So the reason I find this good news is because I don't think, well, maybe they do, but a lot of people, I certainly didn't realize how destructive fashion industry is on climate and environment. So to know that the biggest players in this field are actually investing in plant-based leather says a couple of things. It says that they understand that they're probably doing some damage that they don't want to do, and maybe it's time to offset it. And that also that the actual textile manufacturers are producing a product that is good enough or better than the current product that they have in. So it should be unrecognizable to the consumer that what they're actually consuming, even though I'm sure they'll call it out as plant-based leather, it should look and feel just like the real thing. And I think that when you see a company like RM Williams, another company that's done it, there's a whole list here. I mean, BMW have invested, Ralph Lauren, Alexander McQueen, Allbirds, Patagonia, H&M, the list goes on. Hermes, I think that's how you say it, Hermes. Their bags may soon be made from mushrooms. So there's another company called MycoWorks that create sustainable alternatives to leather.
If you were stuck on an island with that bag, could you eat it? Could you have a mushroom burger?
How many calories per bag? I'm not sure if it would keep you alive with calories, but yeah, technically I guess you could eat it, right? I don't know. Maybe we should ask their team there. But so that industry, it's a $400 billion industry. So if you get the biggest players investing millions of dollars into this change, you can see the impact it'll have. And then hopefully the consumer demand will actually, alter these decisions that these other companies make and more people jump on board. So I just find that, it's good news. It's also, it brings up a broader question, which is something I wanted to ask you. When you see these companies, not just in the fashion space, but even in the nutrition space, KFC, McDonald's, investing and putting Beyond Meat and other meat alternatives into their menus and providing this plant-based alternative, do you think that these are companies that we should support so that we can hopefully make a bigger difference? Or I know that some vegans tend to actually boycott these companies because they don't want to vote with their dollar and support a company that's also killing animals. Where do you sit?
I see that argument and I hear that argument, but I think when you fundamentally break it down, these companies you've just mentioned are taking a small step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So you want to support that. If you're not supporting that, then essentially you're advocating for perfection. And perfection, we know it can be the enemy of good.
Yeah.
So, I think, many things that are great start very small.
Yeah.
And rather than boycotting these companies, I think we will get far better outcomes in the long run if we support them, wrap our arms around them, celebrate the small changes that they're making that are positive. Of course, we want to make sure that we're not just getting caught up in greenwashing or some sort of marketing PR campaign, and that it's real physical change that's happening. 100%.
Yeah.
We don't want to be blindsided by that. But I think not much is achieved by boycotting them.
I agree. I think that supporting sort of new companies come onto the market who are plant-based, right? Obviously, you want to support those companies, smaller companies, they're new, they're growing, you want to support that. But I think by supporting already established, very large corporations, companies who are probably having a larger a negative environmental impact than these small companies can offset, by supporting these already existing companies, you can actually probably move the needle quicker. We can drive the direction that these companies go in by how we support them and the demand for more plant-based products. So I think this is good news. I don't buy any of these fashion labels that I've mentioned, and I don't eat at KFC or McDonald's, but I think, again, broad public health messaging, I think that this is a step in the right direction.
Is it Hermes or Hermes?
I think it's Hermes. Drop the H.
Drop the H.
I'd say so.
Okay.
Someone will correct us in a comment.
No, I think it's all good stuff. And many ways these companies are responding to changes in societal kind of values and what the new generations coming up, what they want to see in a brand. But also I think for people that maybe haven't changed their values, to see a company like this introducing this into their range might spark some new ideas.
Yeah.
And it can be them responding to the market, but then it can also influence
That's a good point.
the market. So
That's a good point.
I'm not sure about boycotting.
Yeah, agreed.
Recommendations.
Yep.
Should we slide on over to those?
Let's do it. You go.
I am recommending a book, and we've spoken about Dr. Herman Poncer, PhD, who is arguably the world's expert on studying hunter-gatherer tribes, particularly the Hadza. He spent a lot of time living with the Hadza along with one of his colleagues, Brian Wood, I think is his name. And he has a book called Burn. And I have recommended this, not in our episodes, but I have recommended it in other podcasts before. This is the book without the cover.
Yeah.
It looks much better with the cover.
Yeah.
I often take those covers off though.
Yeah, same. Those
if I'm going to
sleeves.
the beach or something.
Yeah.
But I think that this is a great book for anyone who's kind of confused about paleo diet, hunter-gatherer diets, seeing various claims online, and wants to hear from an actual anthropologist who has spent time living with multiple tribes, documenting what they eat, how they live, and is really, really across all of the literature that's out there. And he puts it all, packages it beautifully into this book called Burn, which is, far more complex than just how these tribes eat. There's a lot of information in here about energy expenditure and how exercise affects body weight. So it's a really interesting read. And I have a couple of quotes that I'd like to just read out of here and might give people a bit of an idea as to what they're in store for if they do grab a copy. So one quote that I think is it's short, but it says a lot, is there is no single paleo diet, full stop. The other that I wanted to share is something that builds on our last episode. We spoke about the kind of misrepresentation of the Hadza diet, and Bear Grylls' post came up.
Yep.
So Poncer says, the Hadza, Chamane, which are a tribe in Bolivia, and the Shuar populations all get 65% or more of their calories each day from carbohydrates. Compare that to less than 50% for the typical American diet. So he's highlighting that these hunter-gatherer tribes actually consume more carbohydrates than someone eating the typical American diet.
And they're known to be of lower BMI, healthier, less complications, whilst the carbohydrates in general are often demonized as the reason for those health issues in the Western population.
So we might be blaming the wrong thing. He goes on to say it's not just honey and tubers either. No wonder we've never observed ketosis among Hadza men and women. Their diet is about as far from being ketogenic as one could imagine.
Oh, you just hurt some feelings, man. A lot of people are going to hear that and are going to be very upset. The Hadza, the lean, athletic Hadza population with not a drop of body fat have never been in ketosis.
Well, sometimes facts and emotions, my friend, do not mix very well.
That is true. But that actually is, let's dig into that a little bit. So you would expect, this is me talking here, I'm not talking on behalf of anyone. I would expect a tribe who are hunter-gatherer tribe, in periods where they're not getting food, whether it's days or weeks, that they would enter ketosis, right? You'd expect that they're doing long fasts, just based on food availability. But what it seems like here is that they actually are so good at gathering carbohydrate-rich foods over the day that even if they can't hunt an animal, they're still getting some food in. So that's probably why they never get into ketosis, right? Does that make sense? Is that fair to say? So they're finding food frequently enough to never actually need to go into ketosis and produce ketones.
And I think honey is a big part of that story.
Yeah.
In terms of stopping them going into ketosis. You know, many months of the year, 20 to 30% of their calories are coming from honey.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Well, that's awesome. I'm going to definitely check that book
So
out.
Burn by Herman Poncer,
Burn.
PhD. I'll put that into the show notes.
Love it. Really good. So this week, I don't have a book as I'm still making my way through Orwell, but I did watch a documentary or a 4-part series called Bad Vegan, which was really surprising. It's not actually about veganism. It's not going to teach you about how to eat a healthy diet. It's actually got almost nothing to do with veganism.
Oh, it's not about veganism.
Yeah, so just on that note, I thought that their title was definitely strategic in that, you know, when you look through Netflix and you're browsing for things to look for, often the food ones do take off. There's a lot of...
Is it fiction or non-fiction?
No, it's a true story about a woman in New York who, in the 90s, I believe, starts a vegan restaurant, a raw vegan restaurant, which basically just becomes extremely popular and a magnet for celebrities and all these important VIP people.
What's the name of that restaurant?
I've forgotten the name.
Okay.
There we go. My vegan brain is failing me. I've forgotten the name. But it was like a raw food vegan restaurant, very famous, a lot of press, a lot of newspaper articles. And she had this rise to fame. And she was a beautiful, striking girl who, I mean, I'm not going to spoil it for people, but essentially the entire series is actually about fraud and her becoming a fugitive. And it's just fascinating to see how a person enters her life at a critical time when she's vulnerable and influences her to make some really, really terrible decisions. And it's all around money, all around money and being defrauded. And it's the part that makes this so interesting is she narrates the story from her perspective. She's in the documentary, right? And she's explaining what happened. And I imagine she went into it thinking, you know, I can sort of right some wrongs here by being a part of this documentary. I can expose the truth, tell the story of what really happened. But the producers of the doco somewhat...
She doesn't come off that well.
I don't think she does at all. Yeah,
Interesting.
I did not... I didn't leave that doco going, you know what, the poor girl. I think...
I'd love to hear from her what her thoughts are of the final
product. I think
product.
she did come out and mention that she wasn't happy with how it ended. But nevertheless, it's a really great 4-part series to watch. So, 4 episodes. I think each one's about an hour from memory. So highly recommend Bad Vegan for those who haven't seen it. Probably everyone's seen it by now. But for you.
Well, I will, I'll make sure that as my homework from today.
Yeah, it's really good.
I will do that before our next episode.
Sounds good, man. Anything else?
No, I think there is a final kind of reminder I want to put out there. Not so much a reminder, it's the first time that we've really mentioned this. we want to add another segment to this episode that we're doing together, where we take some questions from folks in the community and we throw them around and answer them during the episode or comment on them where we can. And we thought that the best place to leave these questions would be in the comment section on YouTube. And so if you have any question for Drew, for myself, it could be based on a previous episode. It could just be a question that you have about your health. It could be related to nutrition. It could be related to exercise, sleep, whatever it is. Put it into the comment section. We'll do our best to answer it. If we're unsure of the answer, we'll go away and research. We'll make calls to scientists and professors and doctors within our network and do our best to cover it. And I thought there was a quote from Joe Rogan that is fitting while we're talking about comment section of YouTube. Do you ever get into the comment section?
Not on YouTube, no.
Yeah, I've always really hated YouTube for that reason.
Yeah.
It's like very negative.
Nasty, yeah.
It's just very negative.
Yeah.
But Joe Rogan, he did a tweet. He said, "Do you think Michael Jordan goes around leaving rude/hateful comments on YouTube and Instagram? Being negative all the time isn't cool."
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you can see that in most happy people who are successful and doing productive things with their time aren't losing themselves in comment sections. I do think there is some productivity to leaving a comment that is instructive, not nasty comments. I'm never saying to leave nasty, mean, bullying style comments, but I do think that, like, for example, if I do come across a post that I think has a message that's either controversial or that I'm confused by, the comment section can clear it up pretty quickly. You just have a scan through and you see some opinions and you can get another take on a topic. So obviously, like when someone puts out a tweet it's very one-sided, whilst the comment section allows for conversation. So I understand the reason for it, but yeah, the darkness of YouTube and Twitter comments,
I agree with you. I think you can have respectful dialogue in the comments.
Yeah, you're very good at that.
I think you have to be cognizant of the fact that the written word can come across very differently.
Yeah, that's true.
So I often write something out and then I rewrite it and I rewrite it because I'm almost kind of putting myself in their shoes and thinking that, that's going to trigger them. They're not going to answer my question here. They're just going to think this guy's a jerk.
Yeah. It's not productive.
So I think using comments is super important, but you can do it in a thoughtful, constructive way. And it will, generally then the response that you get will be more helpful for whatever you're trying to clarify
100%.
as opposed to some sort of just ad hominem message back to you telling you to find another page to comment on.
Here. I agree with that.
Completely. Okay. How do you think we did?
Mate, I really enjoyed that. I've enjoyed every episode I've ever done, but that was extremely fun.
There was one thing that I did miss when we were talking about the debate and then we moved to the blood tests. I wanted to mention the guidelines that I mentioned there, the European Society of Cardiology. I will put a link to those into the show note and you can refer to Table 8. Table 8 goes through healthy diet characteristics.
Right.
And I think that's just a great evidence-based summary of top-line characteristics, things to think about when you are constructing your meals, when you're at the grocery store, if you want to lower your risk of having a heart attack or having a stroke.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks, man. That was
Thanks,
as fun as always. Appreciate it.
So happy you got few things off your chest.
I've got plenty more. You wait.
Yeah. Well, we'll do it again soon.
We will. All right, man.
Thank you, my friend.
See you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode and your interest in science-based conversation. I hope you enjoyed it and found the information covered interesting and instructive. If you did and you'd like to show your support for the show, please subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can stay up to date with new episodes and watch them in video format. Yes, the full-length videos. Please also consider subscribing to the show on the Spotify and/or Apple Podcast app, wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. You can also leave a review on Apple or Spotify. Again, a great way to support the show and make our content more discoverable for others to enjoy and learn from. If you have any comments about the episodes, suggestions for future episodes, including guests you'd like to see on the show, or questions that you'd like to have answered, please leave those in the comments section on YouTube. I myself and my team will take note of these comments when planning future episodes. Finally, the best way to support the show and receive discounts on products we love is by checking out our sponsors at theproof.com/friends. Enjoy your week, stay well, and I look forward to catching you in the next episode.